Good morning, everyone. I'm Aggie Malter, Executive Director of PAISBOA. I'm delighted all of you could be with us today. This program has been probably about 6 months in the making. And this is a great opportunity for all of us to get together and talk about safety and security for our schools, and to have some of our vendor partners come and give very short demos of some of the products that might help you in your endeavor to keep the kids on your campus safe. So without further ado, I'm going to just make a couple of pitches for a meeting that we're having coming up on May 8th. PAISBOA is having their annual meeting at the Springfield Country Club, and it's a morning meeting. So we're going to start early with breakfast at 8 a.m., and we're going to be wrapped up by 12:30, so those of you who want to get back to campus can do so, and those of you who want a few hours to yourself can go do what you want in the afternoon. We won't tell, I promise. So we urge you all to come and spend some time with us on May 8th at the Springfield Country Club. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Tilney, our consortium manager. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Aggie, and welcome all of you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to come and join us today for our Safety and Security Summit. In designing this program, it was really important to us to present for you ideas, suggestions, solutions. When you walk out today, checklists, things that you can take back to your schools and universities, the concrete ideas, and also the wider big picture as you're thinking about what is a very complex question about safety and security at our schools and universities. We also did invite some of our vendor partners to join us today, in part and parcel of this notion of, you know, certainly generating the questions, addressing the problems, but also finding some solutions to those problems. So we're going to open with Chris, who is doing a presentation on empowering your community to prepare for a crisis. Around 12:15, we're going to transition, and our vendors are going to each do a presentation on their safety solutions for you. And then at 1 o'clock, Chris is going to continue with his second presentation. If you need a restroom, directly back on the left are the men's, and on the right are on the women's. And please help yourself to as much lunch as you can manage, and we have coffee over here. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to introduce to you Chris Jaffe of Jaffe Emergency Services. Thank you.
Thank you. Real quick, can you hear me if I don't use the microphone? I tend to have a really good teacher voice, even though I'm not a teacher. So I want to start. Oh. All right, never mind my teacher voice. So I want to start by saying we're gonna start our conversation at this organizational level, and my challenge to each of you is to think organizationally in this first chunk about how prepared you are for crisis, about how prepared you are to recover from crisis. We're going to give you a ton of homework, and so I'll start with the homework after you're done with lunch, don't worry. But I do want to make sure that as you walk out, especially in this first component, that you're really thinking kind of organizationally. And then we're going to drill down and focus in on sort of the specific people and the specific lockdown questions. And I think for a lot of us, lockdown, active shooter, Alice, these are the questions that are on our minds. And so as important as those things are, I think there's this organizational question that we have to ask first, and that is, are we equipped? Are we prepared to handle any emergency, whether it's a fire, whether it's severe weather, whether it's something else that may happen on campus, or maybe even a lockdown? And so with me, I have Lauren, who is our DC-based emergency preparedness consultant. She's going to be around and helping to answer questions, helping to make sure that as we kind of move through this conversation that things stay relevant and applicable, and that you can really build a solid goals sheet. And to that end, I just want to ask if everybody actually has a goals sheet with them. And that is a sheet that looks like this. If you don't have one, could you just raise your hand? All right, we'll get that to you. So throughout our conversation, that's really going to be how you record your homework, and we'll talk a lot about the assignments that you'll take on. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, and then we'll dive right in. About 10 years ago, when I was 12, I was in the fire service and started a CPR and first aid training company because I needed something to do with my free time. And I started to train schools, and they started to say, hey, can you help us with more than just CPR and first aid training? And they were some of the most engaged groups that I had ever had the opportunity to work with. And then they said, can you help us run our fire drills? I thought, yeah, I've got the ability to, so let's try it. And then they said, I started in California, so they said, can you help us run our earthquake drills? And I said, sure, I think so. And so figured out how to run an earthquake drill, and then came back to the schools and said, okay, let's try this together. And then it was lockdown drills, and then it was business continuity, and then it was training for how to make everybody to come together. And so we titled that the incident command process, and we'll talk about that today. But over the years, we found this really organic and kind of incredible growth. Today, we have 1,400 folks across the country serving almost 1,000 schools. And we work on everything from the really small stuff, like when a kid has lice or when there's a measles outbreak. And I don't want to say that's small, but I guess I would say it's isolated to maybe one student or one group of students, all the way up to the really big stuff. And I'm going to start the conversation today by sharing a little bit with you about the most recent California wildfires. And rather than me tell you this story, I'm actually going to share with you a video that's put together by 6 heads of school who endured the wildfires together. And I'll tell you before we start this video that the thing that I learned in the wildfires, the thing that I learned as we experienced these both 2 years ago as well as this school year, was that all of the work that we've been doing with schools one-on-one is powerful and it's important and it's relevant, but there's this missing link that we had been missing. There's this piece that we had been missing, and that's connecting schools to one another. And so as we talk today, especially in this first sort of component, I really want to challenge you to think about what other schools are in the room, who's close to you, who's connected to you. Where did your head work previously? Where did your director of X work previously, right? Where are those relationships that we have within the school community of our areas? And how might we find ways to work together to make sure that we can endure an emergency? Because coming together for these heads, as you'll see, was perhaps the only way that they could get through these emergencies. And so I'm going to start this video.
The first night of the fires I spent in a parking lot off of 101. A stranger handed me a wet rag so that I could wrap it around my face and protect myself from the smoke. We put in motion what became a daily email to the community where we created a database of needs, people who needed shelter immediately, people who needed clothing, people who needed food.
The phone started ringing for me on Sunday evening, and the fires were coming. We were closed as of that Monday and stayed closed for 2 weeks. Many of our families lost homes, either to smoke damage or fire. Some of our faculty lost homes. Some of our alumni family lost homes.
As a school, we opened within a couple of days as a support center. The school itself was closed to students just due to air quality, and we didn't have power. But we were able to open with some staff just to offer a place for families to come, to have a cup of coffee, to make a call to insurance companies, to provide a place for kids to come and play and just have a sense of normalcy.
Our community organized, with the support of our Parents Association, a place to feed the firefighters who were fighting the local fires. Something I often think about is that in fire preparedness, they tell you to think of the 4 Ps, so prescriptions, passports, and pets, and of course people. And in our case, we had a 5th P, which was portraits, because it was something that was so important to our community and holding us together. Our school had burned in 1961 in the Bel Air fires, and the thing that had been saved and salvaged from those fires were the portraits of our founders. We also held a meeting for all of the families with Jaffe to be able to talk to them about what we've learned about our emergency preparedness, specifically fire-related emergencies.
The fire had ravaged ropes courses, stables, sports facilities. Buildings were just collapsing on themselves and still on fire, and it was the most tragic, moving to see. That day we communicated with all the girls, the saddest thing I've ever done. So they had lost everything, and It was very emotional. We were in the library down here, and we vowed to graduate our senior class and finish strong. We had hundreds and hundreds of people come with shovels, paintbrushes. Amazing. We were up and running, if that's the right term, 4.5 weeks later. The kids came back for the second semester, January.
We had our older kids lining the street with signs of welcome back to Crane and, you know, keep our community, Montecito strong, and honking cars. And when you have something that you love and that you have enjoyed, and then suddenly it's denied to you, you realize how much you miss it and what a privilege it is. So, I mean, very much that was sort of an upside to this whole thing, was just realizing, you know, to be grateful for what we have.
And I think as some of you watch that, I hope what you see is the opportunity to connect with other schools who are in a similar position. I think some of you may look at that and say, well, we're not in wildfire territory, right? Or we may not have to respond with quite as many schools in quite the same way. And so I want to take a second to kind of, again, zoom out and just talk about what risks we do face. Across the country, believe it or not, fire is still one of the biggest risks that faces schools. There's nothing worse than a fire that either takes one part of your building or your entire building, or buildings, I should say. And I'll tell you, I had a school in the Midwest that had this tiny fire. How many of you have a Chrome card or a laptop card of some kind? Okay. So I had this tiny laptop cart that caught fire and that burned just one section of the school. And in a matter of about 6 hours, parents' perspective was that the entire school was unsafe, that the entire school was at risk, and that they couldn't send their kids back for days, weeks, or in some cases, ever. And so even things that we might feel like are contained from the school level, and a lot of us in this room are plant managers, we have the experience to know that this may not be as big of an impact, still then have to figure out how to tell that story to parents so that they feel comfortable, that they feel confident, that they feel capable of sending their kids back. We look at other types of challenges. In particular, we're talking about severe weather, we're talking about flooding, things that may just cause our campus to be inaccessible for a period of time. I was at a school yesterday where a sewer line had burst. I would call that a continuity event. It caused a set of classrooms not to be accessible, an area of campus not to be able to be used throughout the remainder of the day, maybe several more days. And so we deal with some of these sort of isolated events more often, and I would guess many of you have had some sort of event like that. Just by show of hands, who's had either a pipe burst, small fire, tree fall over, flooding in the last 2 or 3 years? A few of you are looking at me like, who hasn't? And then last but not least, our kind of challenging risk factor to talk through is this idea of a lockdown or a human-created incident. And I think I surprise people a lot when I talk about lockdown in a business continuity discussion or this sort of organizational resilience discussion. But the truth is, after a lockdown event occurs, if there's somebody who came to campus to do something or to cause harm, part, if not all of our campus is a crime scene. And so we can't actually resume classes the next day. In some cases, parents won't let us resume classes in the same spaces, the same buildings, the same parts of campus the next day or for an even longer period of time. And so all of these different risks fall into the category of, these could cause a continuity event, or these could cause us to have to challenge ourselves to build resilience within the community. I want to sort of take just a quick step back to say, as you think about, and I should actually go back to that slide, as you think about the risks that you face, are there other risks that come up for you? Are there other concerns that are either unique to your campus, maybe unique to the part of the community that you're in? What other challenges are really specific to you? I should also tell you, I was a paramedic for years, so I can totally outweight you. You just have to shout it out. Chemical plants. Yeah, so some of you may be near a chemical plant, may have this extra challenge of what happens if there's either a spill, an explosion, a burst, something, right? And that causes that shelter in place or causes a situation where maybe we can't open school. What else? Yeah. Nuclear reactor. Yeah, that's a big one. Let's do a deck of cards. So what I should also tell you is that we'll give you a little goodie, so thank you. So nuclear reactor is an absolutely excellent one. That if something goes wrong there, we're talking days, weeks, months, years, maybe even before we can come back. Yeah. Railroad. So a couple times a year, somewhere in the country, and in fact fairly locally, fairly recently, we see trains fall off tracks. We see parts of trains fall off tracks. We see train explosions. So railroads can cause challenges. What else? Yeah. Absolutely. So tanker overturning, causing a spill, causing a fire, causing an explosion, causing maybe even just a situation where parents can't get to school to pick up or to drop off. Maybe causing a situation where if we've got a boarding community where students can't leave school, nobody can come in or nobody can leave. So all of these are great. As you think about the organizational resilience process, what I would challenge you to do is take a look at this risk matrix. And most of you have probably seen this before, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. But I like to challenge everybody to think about what is the likelihood that any of these things are going to happen? If you're really close to a highway, if you're really close to a road where major tankers drive frequently, then there's a fairly reasonable chance that one of them will tip over at some point, or one of them will be in a car accident, or one of them will catch fire. So that's fairly likely. And you don't have to be a scientist to figure out 1 through 5. You can take sort of a best guess approach here. And then you say, okay, if it does happen, how big of a deal is it? Right? If we were to have a fire in a laptop cart and it were outside and it were totally contained to just that laptop cart, well, probably not that big of an impact. But if we have that fire and it spreads and it covers an entire building, or we have an explosion at a chemical plant, or we have an explosion from one of the tankers, that can be a huge impact. That could flatten our campus in some cases, depending on where we are. And so we, again, kind of look at that scale on the bottom and we go, is it a minimal impact? Is it lice with one student, isolated to one student? Is it huge and catastrophic where it could impact everybody? Severe weather could impact everybody, the entire campus, the entire community. And then you just sort of put those two together, and you can see on the top right corner those red areas. Those are the areas that you absolutely have to prioritize. So you should have an emergency response plan for those items, right? You should have something to do in the emergency that faculty, staff, everybody knows how to do. And then you should also have, as part of your resilience plan, a strategy for how you recover from that. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and pull out your goals sheets. Again, those are these. If you need a copy, just raise your hand. All right. And your first homework assignment, if you will be to go back to campus and to take a look around campus and to really prioritize your risks. And I would use these 3 as a starting point, right? Fires, floods, and severe weather, and lockdown or human-created incident. And then I would push yourselves and push your thinking to what other types of events might occur on campus? What other types of events might occur around campus, and how severe are those things? And I would really push you to create both an emergency plan for those items, and it doesn't need to be an individualized emergency plan that's 1,000 pages long. It can be a one sheet. In some cases, it might even be 2 sentences in your emergency plan. But do make sure that your faculty, your staff, your students maybe even, know what to do if that event occurs. And then push your thinking a step further and say, let's say this did happen, and let's say we handled it relatively correctly. Then how do we recover from it? What are the pieces, what are the steps that we might need? And we'll talk a little bit more about this whole idea of recovery and resilience here in just a moment. But what are the ways in which we might need to find partnerships with other schools, with some of our vendors, with people from the community? What are the ways that we would actually come back from this? How could we actually come back from this? I also want to sort of shift the conversation as we talk about emergency plans just briefly to say, how many of you are familiar already with the incident command system? How many of you currently have a command center, for example? Okay. How many of you have a strike team of some kind? Could be search and rescue or first aid or reunification. Okay. How many of you have a person who's on campus who generally makes decisions during an emergency or a crisis? Do you call that person the head of school? No. Okay, who do you call that person? Me. You, all right. Who are you?
I'm a director of facilities.
Director of facilities.
Emergency response for 4 years.
All right. Thank you. So for some of you, it might be your head of school. For others, it might be somebody in the business office, might be director of security, director of the plant, director of facilities. Whomever it is, there's somebody who makes decisions during a crisis. We use this really fancy chart to design our incident command process or our incident command flow of information. And I would actually ask if you, we'll send this PowerPoint out afterwards, but if you want to take a quick picture, you're more than welcome to do that. Because goals sheet item number 2 is going to be to develop this incident command process. And I'll walk you through it just briefly because it's critical and it's also something that you can apply relatively quickly by just filling in names. And so the quick story to this is this top chunk, this incident command structure that you see at the very top, that's your group that's in charge of whatever the response is. That's your group that should be making all of the decisions, that should be deciding what's going to be communicated, should be deciding what the community is going to do. That's your group of people who are going to evaluate and make the really tough decisions. And the person who's at the very top of that group, the person who's going to make the final really, really tough decision, that's your incident commander. For those of you where incident commander and head of school are interchangeable, great. For those of you where incident commander and head of school are not interchangeable, where maybe somebody else makes those decisions, great. I would encourage you to think for a second, and please don't raise your hands or even make a face at this for your own safety, but I would encourage you to think for a second about your head of school or whomever it is that's your incident commander. And just think for a second about how they handle small crises. Some of you are laughing, you know where I'm going with this. Think for a second maybe about how they handle mid-sized crises, how they handle an event where the middle of the day gets thrown off. And think about whether they're really the right person to handle a giant crisis, whether they're really the right person to handle the aftermath of a lockdown incident, whether they're really the right person to handle making decisions as severe weather comes through and damages buildings, whether they're really the right person to be in charge as a fire event is occurring and we're trying to deal with the fire department who's on scene and we're trying to deal with evacuating kids. What I would tell you is that heads of school are typically selected because they're brilliant in academics. They're brilliant fundraisers. They're brilliant leaders. They're brilliant communicators. They build boards. They build teams, not because they manage emergencies well. Do we have any heads of school in the room? Can I ask, during your interview process, did anybody ever say, how do you fare when an emergency occurs? Very good point. So truth be told, some heads of school are incredible incident commanders, and we have tons and tons of those. Others are not. And my challenge to you would be to find a safe way and an appropriate way based on who your head is to have the conversation if they're really not the best person to be the incident commander, and to say, maybe it should be the CFO, maybe it should be the director of safety, maybe it should be me. And it's not that your opinion won't be voiced or heard, it's not that you won't be included as part of the decision-making process, but when we need to make really quick decisions, during emergencies, when tension is high, I think maybe this other person might be the best fit to do that. And again, very complex political conversation, so let me know if you'd like to practice that before you go back to your head. So that's the incident commander, and again, that role is to make all of the decisions, to make every tough decision that has to be made. And then to support those decisions, we've got a few other roles that are critical. And this typically looks like senior admin, right? And again, this is not true for every community. Some communities have things structured a little bit differently, and that's completely okay. It doesn't really matter who goes where so long as the process exists. But we have maybe the CFO who's helping to track where the money spend is. Because believe it or not, as we respond to a fire, we're going to spend $500,000 in a matter of about a week, if not significantly more, on all of the various business interruption that's going to occur, on transporting kids to other locations, on putting people up in houses or hotels if we're a boarding community. We're going to spend tons and tons of money. It's all going to be, not all. Much of it is going to be reimbursed by the insurance company, and so there's an opportunity down the road to get those funds back, but somebody does have to track what money's going out the door. It might be your director of communications or your director of marketing, because at the end of the day, somebody has to tell parents what's happening, right? In some cases, somebody may even have to talk to the media. And so fill out the incident command center, those core people who are going to be in charge, as well as you can with the right people who can make decisions and then who can communicate about those decisions. The other thing I would tell you is, as I respond to schools, and I don't think I mentioned this, but we actually do emergency response for schools, right? So a school will pick up the phone, will call us, and will say, we just had a fire, or we just had a kidnapping, or we just had a lockdown. And I say, okay, I'll be there in a second. And then I go get on a plane somewhere and I try to get there as quickly as I can. And as I walk in, one of the most common experiences that I see is that command center all standing in the sun or rain, staring at each other, entirely dehydrated, entirely exhausted, and entirely drained, making terrible decisions. Does anybody know why that is? Yeah. Exactly. They spend so much time, energy, and effort trying to make sure everybody else is okay that they forget that they have to take care of themselves. That and emergencies are not situations that school leaders deal with, right? Again, we're not trained for that. That's not part of our job description, or at least it wasn't supposed to be when we got into this. Nobody became a head of school in order to run crises. But they do run meetings all the time, right? How many of you have run a meeting in the last 2 weeks? And when you ran that meeting, you were probably sitting around a table. And you might have even had food or water or coffee or tea that was brought to that meeting to help everybody be more comfortable. And you might have laid out an agenda at the beginning of the meeting to say, this is what we're going to talk about. And somebody might be taking notes. That's an environment that you're really comfortable in. And so I want to be a voice on your shoulder when you're facing your next emergency. And I hope that I can find my way to your shoulder when you experience it. And what I want you to do is I want you to say, hey, everybody, I know this is scary, and I know this is a really bad situation. Let's go find the shade. Let's go sit down, let's get some bottles of water, and let's talk like we normally would. Because when you put yourself into that environment where you're more comfortable, where you can communicate more traditionally, more like you typically do, you find that the decisions you make are more like the decisions you would normally make. And they're much better, and they're much stronger, and then they're much more long-term. So can I be on your shoulder when you deal with your next emergency? Just a nod of your head? Some of you are like, I don't want you on my shoulder. That's okay. There are some other roles that you need to have in this incident command structure. Best case scenario, you would have somebody in each of these roles. You'd have a group of people even in each of these roles. So somebody would be doing search and rescue. As we evacuate the buildings, inevitably, it's possible that students get caught, right? Or students get stuck. Maybe even faculty or staff get stuck. And so somebody would be helping to make sure that the buildings were actually clear. Ideally, you'd have somebody doing attendance to make sure that we actually knew who did evacuate from the building. I would guess most of you currently conduct attendance during a fire drill or any other type of drill. Okay. How many of you then do something if you're missing somebody? How many of you are ever missing somebody when you get to the end of attendance? Okay, a couple. Something really fun is just pull a student out of line on the way out and then see if the attendance team actually catches that there's a student missing. And it's fun for me. I hope it's fun for you too, but we do that a lot. And it's interesting to find how quickly people will go, oh yeah, everybody's here. They just check off every single person because that's what they're accustomed to. But it sort of forces everybody to go through this experience and this practice a little bit more. I would argue the most imperative team you can possibly have is your reunification team. And out of curiosity, how many of you have ever done a reunification drill? Awesome. All right, just one. Anybody else? Can I ask for a round of applause? I will tell you that at the end of every single school-based emergency, at the end of every single one, there's one thing that is always going to happen, and that is you have to give kids back to their parents, right? Whether it's a lockdown, whether it's severe weather, whether it's a fire, whether it's an alien invasion, whatever it is, right? At the end of it, you know you're going to have to give kids back to their parents. And so I would challenge you, and in fact, I'll ask you to jot this down as goal sheet number 3, I think we're on, to conduct a reunification drill at some point in the next 18 months. I don't want to suggest that this is a really easy thing to do, and some of you might be thinking, wait a second, what is a reunification drill, or what is this whole process? Reunification is how do I actually hand kids back to parents at the end of the whole thing? And reunification is about making sure that the right kids go home with the right parents, that the right kids also go home with the right nanny, babysitter, grandparent, family friend, whoever it might be that's on the emergency card. But reunification is also the opportunity for parents to observe how you responded to the emergency itself, right? Parents won't see how quickly you moved into lockdown. Parents won't see how quickly you called the fire department and the fire department showed up and put out the fire. Parents won't see how quickly you searched and rescued and found every student that was supposed to be in the building. Parents won't even see that one heroic move where you ran into the classroom and you pulled the student out and it was a burning building or whatever it was, right? Parents don't see any of that. But they do always see the reunification process. And if you do that correctly, you have the opportunity to build confidence in the emergency itself. And I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do as a school. And yet I will tell you, probably 90% of schools across the country haven't done this yet. So it's not an easy thing to do, right? You'll have to schedule a drill for the end of the day, somewhere during dismissal. You'll have to find an opportunity to probably do a test group, right? Build your reunification team, then test it maybe with 10 to 20 people. And then you'll go through the process of handing kids back, and you'll make sure everything works. And then you'll schedule that real one where you actually release every student. This is even more difficult for boarding schools, and for how many of you are boarding communities? Okay, if you are a boarding community, keep your hands up if you only have boarding and you don't have any day students. All right, you've got both. Okay, so if you have both, I would challenge you to do this with your day students and not with your boarding students, because it's really a lot of work to make parents come in from out of town just to go through this process. But if at least 20% or so of your students are day students, that'll still give you a fair opportunity to test how this process works and to see how it all works. Truth be told, for boarding schools, sometimes you'll actually do reunification with your boarding students by getting them to planes, and it's a very different process, right? We saw that during the California fires. That's totally okay. We just want to understand what the process of handing kids literally back to their parents is going to look and feel like. Out of curiosity, is there anything you could share about the drill that maybe worked or didn't work? What?
So I did my drill, it wasn't here, it was in the Midwest. I was working at a boarding school. And it was an active killer scenario. We worked it in 5 phases. First phase, I think it was just internal. Second phases was using emergency services, police, troopers, EMS, fire, etc. Third was evacuation to an off-site RV. Then we did a tabletop exercise for the reunification phase.
Wow.
Then we practiced that afterwards. We did everything but hand the children back. So counsellors, press releases, all that sort of stuff.
Excellent. All right. So again, I want to underscore that this is not a light lift, right? This is a big project to try to schedule this, but I can tell you that every school that's done it has found really unique and unexpected challenges with the process and has been able to solve for those in advance. And there's nothing better than being able to solve for those problems during a regular day than having to try to deal with solving those problems during an actual and active emergency. There's some other teams, and again, I'll let you kind of fill those in, and we can certainly talk one-on-one about how facilities and logistics plays a role and how crisis counseling plays a role. Some of those are a little more obvious than others. But if you were to set up no other teams after walking out of today's conversation, I would challenge you to start with the command center, make sure you have some process for attendance, and then make sure you have reunification. And there's one added wrinkle I want to throw at you, and that is, for those of you that are building out the command center, and frankly any of these teams, if your default incident commander is a person, which how many of you, it's going to be some person on campus? I should see everybody's hands go up. Some of you, is this a trick question? It is, sort of. That person probably goes to a conference every once in a while, right? Some of you are here. That person might be off campus, might just get sick, might get stuck in traffic, right? They might just not be there when an emergency happens. And so who's the number 2 person? And is that really documented? Is that number 2 person comfortable with it? I was at a school a couple months ago where I went in and I said, okay, great, we know who our incident commander is, it's the head of school. And I said to the head of school, okay, if you're not here, who takes charge? And she said, I don't remember what the person's name was, but she said, this person. And so on the way out, I said to this other person, I said, hey, are you comfortable being the incident commander if the head of school is not here? And she said, what? And I said, oh, whoops. But it turns out she never knew that she was tasked with being the leader had the head of school not been on campus. And so make sure that everybody in that succession list, and you should have at least 5 or 6 people in that list, actually know that they're in charge if the head of school or whoever the normal incident commander is not there. And then I would also caution you to think about the big conferences in particular, think about kind of practically speaking, is there ever a time when all of those people on that list of 5 aren't there? If so, you're going to need to add more. Right? Boarding communities, you need to include somebody who lives on campus. If everybody's in a division leadership role or in the business office, what happens during NAAS and NBOA, right? Those are my highest anxiety days of the year because the largest number of school administrators are off campus, and I worry that they don't have a plan in place for what to do while they're gone. So just make sure that you're really contemplating who it is that might step into that role, that you feel comfortable and confident, and that they do too, that they can be effective while you might be out or while the person who's in charge might be out. Sure.
How do you handle the out of state, out of the country
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So if you didn't hear it, the question was, how do you handle when students text their parents before you can get a message out to them, especially if they're out of the country or if they're out of state or if they're just out of area? And I think it's a phenomenal question. It's getting more and more difficult for us across the country to get messaging out to parents faster than students can, right? How many of you have students who, quote unquote, don't have their cell phones during the day? Yeah, some of you are like, I want to raise my hand because the rule says no, but I know they have them, right? The reality is, as soon as an emergency starts, students are going to send a text to their parents. And the story that students are going to tell to their parents is so much worse than what's actually happening, I promise. And then parents are going to read that message, and the parents are going to escalate that story, and so it becomes this huge event where the parents call you and they're like, how come there are aliens on campus running all over and they've been taking students to outer space? And like, these are the types of scenarios that parents will call with. The truth is there's not much that we can do to prevent students from communicating to parents. We can ask them not to, but if the students are, if there are 15 students in a classroom and one teacher, the odds aren't great that the teacher is going to be able to take control of all those students and take all their phones, and who would want to do that anyway? And so this best solution I can offer is to develop a holding message, and to develop just a very simple 3-sentence message that says, we are experiencing an emergency. We are doing everything we can to keep everybody safe, and we will communicate again to you in 30 minutes. And to send that message as soon as the emergency starts. And if you do that, at the very least, you might beat a few of the students to getting that message out to parents, and you're showing that you're in control of the situation. You're showing we know there's something going on. You're setting and telling the story that you want to tell, which is we are in control, we're doing something about it, we're keeping people safe, or at least trying like crazy. And you're setting a next step or an expectation. And so are parents going to pick up the phone and call the school? Absolutely. Are parents who live in the area going to rush to school and try to jump the fence and run through the gates and run across the lawn? Of course. But at the very least, we've communicated to them and we've set some expectations. And if I don't pick up the phone, I don't have to worry about it as much because parents already have some idea that we're in control of the situation that's going on. I really push hard for that during lockdown because I think that's the time when students are the most afraid. And the more afraid the student is, the more outlandish this story they tell their parents will be, and the more terrified the parent will be, and the more terrified they are, the less likely that child is to come back, right? And if we start losing students after a lockdown event, even if it's not a dangerous one, right, but it's just a situation where parents didn't feel safe, didn't feel like you took care of their kids well, then that creates major negative impacts and consequences. And it happens. After every lockdown, I would say maybe 1 out of 4 or 5 lose a couple students. And these are not the huge ones we see on TV, right? Certainly students are lost in those circumstances as well. But these are just the person who's doing something wrong down the street. This is the bank robbery that happens down the street, and the robbers go running around, so we go into a protective lockdown, and we'll talk more about that this afternoon. But after those situations, if we don't communicate well, we run the risk of having students not come back to school. So I want to ask you to think a little bit out of the box. In fact, I'll ask you to just close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you to go back to campus and envision it's, well, let's say it's noon on Thursday. Is today Thursday? Yes, it is. So it's noon on Thursday. Where are you if you weren't here right now? Where would you typically be? Are you in your office? Are you walking to a meeting? Are you in your head's office? Are you out somewhere on campus? Are you in your car? Are you homesick because you didn't feel like coming to work today? Where are you? Lunch, okay. On campus or off campus?
Well, I live on campus, so I'm there.
Okay, so you're all right. So wherever you are right now, you hear the fire alarm go off and you evacuate. And you walk out of the buildings as quickly as you can, students follow you out. And as you get outside, you look around, you see everybody else is outside too. What do you have with you? And I'll ask you to just shout it out. Cell phone, what else? Radio, what else? Keys, what else? List of kids. Did you bring the kids? Awesome. What else? First aid kit, maybe? Emergency medications, EpiPens, inhalers, that kind of stuff. All right, what else? I didn't hear anybody mention checks. Does anybody bring checks out when you evacuate? paper checks to write checks? No? Okay. Anybody bring like student information, like student health records on a USB or a giant packet? Okay, a few of you. Anybody bring reunification information? What parents can, or what adults can kids go home with? Either on a USB, maybe on a laptop? Anybody? It's online. Okay, so I can get it on my app. Okay. Excellent. Okay, and they probably have satellite internet, so even if our internet goes down, they can get access to it. That may be a question to ask. So I didn't hear anybody mention some of these really critical business things, right? How do we actually keep doing business if we don't bring some of these things out? What I would challenge you to think about is each of the items I just mentioned, right? Checks and student records, maybe even your donations and contributions records, right? How many of you are on Razor's Edge or some program like that? How many of you are not on Razor's Edge, maybe don't have it in the cloud? Anybody not have the donation data or fundraising data in the cloud? Okay, a few of us. One of the schools we had in Southern California had grade books, fundraising data, attendance books, and report cards for the year, all built into this local server that was on campus, and for some reason it wasn't backed up. It, like, you know how that happens with servers and computers every once in a while. You forgot to push a button, didn't get backed up for like 6 months. The fire came through, the fire took out the server. And so the school had to rebuild that data from the ground up in an Excel spreadsheet just because it wasn't backed up or it wasn't housed somewhere else. After a major attack to Amazon Web Services servers, right, if there were a big AWS attack or a big Google attack, it's possible that we could all be in that position because Razor's Edge is just hosted in somebody's cloud system, right? It's backed up and there's tons of cybersecurity around it, but it's totally possible that some of that data becomes fragmented and lost. And so as we think about this data, as we think about kind of some of the mechanics, my push really is to build redundancies around it. And so what I want to ask you to do on goals sheet number 4, I think we're at, is to identify the most critical infrastructure to your community. What are the most critical items that we have to have? And my guess is that they're going to be things like, we've got to have people, right? We've got to have space if we're going to run school. If we're going to move school, we have to have transportation in order to get kids from point A to point B. How many of you feel like food is a critical item? Yeah, I'm hungry. How many of you feel like cash or the ability to pay people is a critical item? Okay. People, do we actually have to pay salaries and vendors? Yeah. So there's a benchmark that I want to share with you, and that's 7 days. After a major emergency happens, you have roughly 7 days to resume education either on campus or off campus before you really start to lose a material number of students. And the idea behind that is that we've got working families, and working families have to go to work, right? How many of you have 60% or more of your families that are actually working families? So they've got to go to work. So they love your school because your school has this wonderful community. Your school has the academics. Your school has opportunity to move their students to the next great school. There are all these things they love about your school. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things that your school does is provide childcare, right? It provides them a mechanism so they can go to work. And so they need us to get back to school in 7 days because they just don't have the time that they can take off in a lot of cases. How many of you have at least a small population on your staff and faculty that are millennials? How many of you are already struggling with keeping them retained, right? NAIS sends out this update every couple of years now where they say millennials are the hardest group of faculty to engage and retain, and they keep leaving and they keep going to other places. And there are some data points about them. They're not fixed, right? They're not tied to a specific area. They don't own homes. They don't have robust families that are keeping them in a specific area. And so if you can't put them back to work quickly, they can pick up and go home, wherever that is, whether it's another city, another town, another state, another country, they can disappear. And it's really easy for them to do. And then there's this really awkward and challenging inverse relationship about homes in general. I would guess that most of your families own a home that's somewhere within 10 to 25 miles of your school. That's non-boarding families, right? Most of your day families own a home that's somewhere within 10 to, let's say, 25 miles of your school. How many of you would say that's right? All right. How many of you would say the same is true for your faculty and staff? Okay, some shaky hands. Again, if a home is one of the strongest ties to help people stay local, to help people stay grounded in the area they're in, not owning a home is a great reason to pick up and leave. And so I would push you and challenge you to try to resume operations within 7 days after any emergency occurs. And so I'm going to ask you to add to goal sheet number 4A, because I think you're going to run out of goals in a second. I'm going to ask you to add to hold a business continuity discussion, right, or to have a discussion where you actually think about how you might implement some of the ways to keep school operational or to resume school within 7 days. There's a document I'm going to pass out, which is called a Memo of Understanding. Oh, thank you. And this particular MOU is designed around transportation. And so this is just a very specific agreement that says to a bus company, maybe a coach van company, hey, if we need your services, can we buy them from you? Can we hire you? If it's the middle of the night, who do we call at 2 a.m.? And how is this all going to work? And what I would push you to do is once you've identified those items that are your critical responsibilities, your critical items, that food, access to cash, access to transportation, access to space, access to people, maybe subs on reserve or teachers on reserve. Once you've identified those critical items, form an MOU with with a vendor in each of those categories. Best case scenario, maybe 3 vendors in each of those categories, so that you have somebody to call to help you make those areas redundant. Right? You can't just get cash out of thin air, but if you've got a bank, the bank has somebody who prints and runs checks, so maybe there's an MOU with that person. If you needed to liquidate an endowment, maybe there's specific people who you need to call, somebody on the board who has to actually sign off and approve that. So I would push you to sort of contemplate who those people are who will help you get access to the resources that you might need. I'm going to stop there for the time being because I want to make sure that we leave enough time for the next sort of portions of the conversation. But I would say keep your goal sheets handy because we're going to keep using them in the afternoon. And certainly if you have questions that come up or you're thinking about how on an individual level you might apply some of these ideas, please don't hesitate to pull me in or Lauren in as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's a great start to our day. We are now going to transition and hear from our vendor partners, and we are going to hear from them. Each has 10 minutes to both present their safety solution to you and also answer questions. And we are going to go alphabetically, which seems to make the most sense. So we're starting with Michael from Athena. I'm going to let you drive.
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Really excited to be here. I have a history selling to schools. I ran a family business for many years called John R. Green School Supply Company. It was a K-12 supplier. We sold it to Kurtz Brothers, which is also in Pennsylvania. Don't know if you guys do business with Kurtz. I'm here representing Athena. We're an AI-based, so I went from selling paper to now representing an artificial intelligence that does threat detection based on the video feeds that are already existing in your schools and in your buildings. So what we do is we plug in our box, our AI box, that does analysis and looks for dangerous weapons, knives, and we've proceeded to also look for other things like slips and falls and things that are probably happen more often and are probably less impact, but very impactful for that individual who falls, or maybe that individual who has a lawsuit. So we think of it as an artificial intelligence platform just geared towards like protecting your assets, the children, the teachers, the parents, the building, anti-graffiti. And what we can do is we can send alerts and go through that chain of command, or we can send it to your, if you do have a central command, we can send alerts. So I do have a little video, and I'll save some time for questions at the end. And we're currently installed in schools around here. So, and this is actually shot at Archbishop Wood, which isn't far from here.
Athena Security keeps you safer with 24/7 gun detection by artificial intelligence. If someone pulls out a gun, our AI cameras detect it immediately. Then you're alerted by text. Using the Athena app, you click on the alert and discover exactly where the gun was found by viewing live video from the scene. You or our monitoring staff verify the threat and click confirm to send the live link to police. Imagine how many lives Athena could save with security that never blinks.
All right, any questions? We think that just like a fire is a low probability event but has a high impact, so would something like a weapon being brought into a school. And so our idea is if we can save seconds and eliminate that power of surprise, then it's still worth it even. We can send information regarding which camera, which door. You guys probably have all your doors numbered, and you can respond accordingly. So that's the idea. Does everyone here have an active shooter protocol? I imagine yes. So we think this fits in nicely with how you think of, just as you do fire alarm drills, and now, unfortunately, there's other kinds of drills that are done, like lockdown. We think that this is a part of thinking of active shooter. And so that's kind of one feature. Another feature that a school uses nearby is taking from a database of blacklisted people that they do not want on campus, as well as gray-listed people. So that's just based on photo ID. It's only as accurate as the pictures that we get of those individuals. And then also slips and falls. So those are kind of the features that currently schools are showing interest in. We have some local clients, and love to talk to you guys if you have any questions after the presentation. Little take-home flyer also if you want it as well. Thank you guys very much. Oh, question. Sure. Most schools have leveled up their technology game over the last couple of years. They have IP-based cameras. The standard camera is going to have 1080 resolution. So that is good for us to do analysis and be able to detect a weapon up to about 40 feet based on that resolution. Outdoor cameras probably have higher resolution and/or telephoto lens. And so installation is very simple because you run a network probably for your security cameras, and we just tap into that feed. Most modern cameras are capable of multiple feeds. And so it's simple to answer the question. And so we can have it done in a couple hours, typically. So we'll work typically with an IT person that runs your network, and or a facility person that owns responsibility for your camera system. And then, of course, would also want to talk to you and do some consultation around how you want the alerts to happen in terms of the chain of command and who you want alerted. We have everything from an app so that your different administrators can have access. But we also have ways to send text messages, to tie in with E911, and do more complicated progressions of escalation. Any other questions? So cool. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now we have Marshall from Bruvna.
Let's do the mic, right?
Yes.
I've been told my voice carries, but I'll make sure to talk into the mic. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for attending today's event. I know for about half of us here, this probably wasn't optional, but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate you being here, especially for this segment right here, which, while slightly commercial, I would hope provides some really useful information to us all. So what we do at RUVNA actually plays in really naturally to what the great folks at Jaffe were talking about, which is that, how can we take what we already do now when it comes to emergency response, communication, reunification, and notification to potentially take that to not only a better place, but to better understand what's happening on campus and keep our communities safe. So I think, using the ICS as kind of a picture, when we think about emergency response, I think the first two things, and talking about, let's say, a lockdown or a fire drill, the first two things we think about are, how do we know what's going on, and are my students safe? And RUVNA is a simple and easy-to-use communication platform that's built around helping you answer those two questions. So if we're all willing to do a quick thought experiment for me, if we think about how our lockdown drills or lockout drills work internally in our schools right now, once a teacher closes the door and looks around at their classroom, if they were to notice a student is missing, how would that teacher, first and foremost, know whether that student was in the bathroom, with another teacher, or, God forbid, in real danger? And then if we scale that up, how would you as safety administrators be able to answer that question? How would you then disseminate that information? And how would we find out where those students are? And those are the types of questions we want to answer at RUVNA. But we want to be able to answer them without causing you to rewrite your entire emergency procedures, install new hardware, or completely rewrite how your technology infrastructure works. At its core, we want to take what you're already doing and help make it work just a little bit better. And that starts with the fact you can actually use RUVNA on any internet-connected device. So I've just logged in to my account here by going to a RUVNA website. I see a few folks in here that do use RUVNA, so I might pick on you if I need to call on someone. But for us, For us, communication starts before the event even happens. And what I mean by that is you have to be able to say something if you see something. So I've actually got the app on my phone right here. And let's say I'm a teacher. And it's a normal day at the school right here called Steenbrook School. So we actually put a digital panic button into every single teacher and administrator's pocket. So if I see something, all I have to do is hit send a panic signal, type it in here. I'm going to say, unknown person, seen outside of my classroom. And as soon as I do that, you notice that information immediately shows up right on the screen. So from there, we're going to be able to go right into emergency response mode. And of course, this just says Teacher 1, but we integrate with any and all SISs you might have running on campus, from Veracross, Blackbaud, Power School. I could name them for the next 5 minutes, but I won't bore everybody. But it's very simple, and you can have this up and running in typically less than 2 weeks. From there, we need to make sure everybody knows what's happening. And that's why we're going to notify your teachers, faculty, administration, and staff exactly what's going on campus. And we do that via text, email, and push notification. So at the click of a button, and you can see I can even customize the events right there, all I have to do is hit start. And as soon as I do that, it's a little small, I know, but you can see right here on this phone, this teacher has been prompted with a list of the students that should be in their class at that time. We're going to pull that directly from your SIS, and we can actually sync that with access control systems as well as daily attendance. So that teacher will immediately know, oh, I don't need to look for these students. And the beauty here is that just by teachers taking roll, what they're already doing, we'll be able to know critical information. And if we think back to that situation I gave earlier of if we're missing a student, how do we know where they are and whom they're with? This is how we answer that question. So you'll notice as soon as I, as this teacher, start taking roll, immediately the number of students checked in, right here, immediately increases. All of this is happening in real time just by virtue of me tapping a student's name. If someone, let's say, finds a student they're not usually with, which I think is a thing we think about a lot during an emergency, any teacher can check in any student they might find by searching their name quite easily. And another critical component when we think of emergency response is what happens to the student who needs an inhaler. Back in 2016, the spate of bomb threats at the JCCs, when we think of lockdowns, we might in our heads go, oh, it's going to take 15 or 20 minutes, but actually on average, we typically see they're closer to an hour. And so 45 minutes into that situation, if a student, Johnny needs an inhaler, someone's having a low blood pressure and they need insulin, blood sugar, how do we handle that? How do we communicate that information, and how do we get them the help? And that's why in Ruvna, all you have to do is do what we call flagging. You click the student's name, flag the student, type in a simple note here, and submit. And as soon as you do that, you'll notice that information is immediately right there and visible to everyone on the platform. You just click the students requiring attention and click the student's name. And if you want to tell the nurse to head right over there, you can use our real-time group-wide messaging to simply type in So the goal isn't just student accountability. For us, the goal is making sure you can communicate critical information quickly, safely, and accurately. And Chris, I know you were talking about this during an event, when you evacuate, how do we get all of our documentation outside? How do we know who's supposed to reunify with who's authorized to pick up certain students? And that's why actually at Ruvna, we want to take all those documents and put them into the cloud. And I might add, our cloud is most definitely backed up in multiple ways, not just AWS. During that big AWS outage, about 95% of websites that run on AWS had some sort of problem. We were 100% up and had about 10 drills run during that little downage, so we're just fine there. And so all you need to do is click on your school documents. So the goal being that I'm pretty sure the first thing people are gonna focus on after making sure their students are evacuating or locking down is that they have their phone. And with Ruvna, if you have your phone, if you have any internet-connected device, you can ensure the safety of your students, of your faculty, and communicate critical information to the community as well as first responders. And I know that we're running a little late in terms of the presentation, so I don't want to eat up too much of your time. So I'll quickly pause and say, do we have any questions about what I've talked about so far, about how this works, how getting it set up might work, and specifically, I guess, how using it in practice might work? No? I'm going to take that as I did a good job. And so, typically with Ruvna, you can be up and running in about 2 weeks. And what's pretty cool here is through PAISBOA, you guys get a pretty large discount on the platform, somewhere over 30%. Shamelessly, I did go to a PAISBOA school. I went to Tom and Reed School, Friends Central there. So I grew up in the area, and we do like to take care of y'all. I'd be happy to answer any further questions or chat further about some of the unique things we do. And we're right over in the corner. Again, my name is Marshall Singer. Yeah. Oh, I appreciate the kind words, Tom. And so when we, if we look into the news, actually, did we all hear about that event at Wissahickon High School, where the student or the guy actually boarded that bus pretty drunk and managed to somehow get into the campus? And so events like that are not something we think about frequently, but are another type of instance where a platform such as Ruvna are immensely helpful. And I don't just reference that because I read about it. I reference that because they actually used Ruvna in that exact event to communicate critical information and ensure the safety of their students. So it's the type of thing where not only are we going to need to use it or hope to have it available for something like a fire drill, but it's also the unforeseen events to ensure continuity, communication, and safe resolution. Again, thank you so much. My name is Marshall Singer, and I hope you're having a great day so far.
Thank you very much, Marshall. And now we are going to hear from Joe Wilson from School Specialty Security Division. And I just need to pull up the PowerPoint. All right. Uh-oh. I had it open on here, and now it's closed.
While she's setting that up, I'll just, real quick, I'll do the demonstration because I know I'm supposed to stand behind the podium and give you the audio. But I'll do the demonstration real quick of a couple of locking solutions we have, and then we'll talk about it when this is up and running. And I'll introduce myself, but I'm going to get ahead of my lecture. Our two locks that I'm demonstrating here, one's a retrofit design. You'll see that as I explain a little further. Has a deadbolt design that's designed to fit over your existing lever, your cylindrical lock. What's unique about this is the single motion egress. It's not a barricade device. So it's 100% code compliant, ADA, life, and fire safety code compliant. Just like the replacement lock design I'm going to show you right here, called QAL. Same thing. Deadbolt, push of a button. single motion egress, you never barricaded or locked inside, no unintended consequences, the student can always exit in the event they need to exit. And there's no special knowledge needed. DHS primer recommends a push button style design to secure your classroom. And again, it has to be 100% code compliant to enjoy the egress automatically without any additional tools, knowledge, or what have you. Always accessible by first responders, by school administrators and staff, with a key from the outside. Suggest the key be controlled in a manner that is appropriate. So there you go. That's a quick demo of the locks. I'll just keep the bolts extended because what's unique about our lock is that it does have a 1-inch stainless steel deadbolt. And I'm going to take you right to that slide. So Joe Wilson's the name. I work for School Specialty. I work in a division called SSI Guardian. So I'm a safety and security consultant, safety and security representative for School Specialty Incorporated. I work in the area from the Carolinas all the way to Maine, but I'm a Pennsylvania guy. I'm a retired Pennsylvania State Police trooper. I was a SWAT commander when I retired from the State Police. My first assignment was Troop K Media, so I'm a Delaware County guy. So I was originally stationed down here back in, I don't want to say, but in around '88. So that's where I was originally stationed. When I left the State Police, I was working in Hershey and Harrisburg, running the CERT or SWAT team for the State Police. I then retired, and I was a deputy chief of police for 5 years in a municipality just outside of Allentown. My son actually went to Valley Forge Military College. He's now a first lieutenant in the infantry. He's an executive officer for the 1st and 111th Infantry, so very proud of that. So I am a local guy. Again, Carolina is the main, but this is my home. Real quick, I'll cover, because I know we don't have a lot of time. There's 3 main core products that I'm going to cover. I was originally just going to talk about the locks, but I want to talk about 3, I call it the hat trick, the trifecta of protecting our classrooms. So our 21st Century Safe Classroom package, you don't have to buy it together. Certainly there'll be greater discounts if you do, but it's to have a proper code-compliant door locking solution like I just showed you, all right? That follows the Department of Homeland Security's primer recommendations for a push-button design and a deadbolt. It needs to have a single motion egress so you can always exit. Again, we want to avoid any unintended consequences where someone, a bully or otherwise, creates a barricaded situation in a classroom and that the first responders can't get in there or the teachers can't get in there and mitigate or protect that situation. Not only that, on the market now, there are currently, and I caution you just to do your homework, and they're being installed, and some are having to be removed because fire marshals are not liking it. Some devices, just be cautious of those. Do your homework, do your research. Make sure what you get is 100% code compliant in every manner. Again, like I mentioned before, this is our retrofit design. It's designed to fit over an existing a cylindrical lever. Looks like a parking meter, maybe not that attractive, but it's very effective. It protrudes a 1-inch stainless steel deadbolt into the jamb, depending on which way the door swings, so that's your security. It's got an indicator button that's very obvious. You know when you're in a lockdown state in that classroom. Doesn't require any particular knowledge or skill. The teacher doesn't have to have a key, doesn't have to have a device. Anyone can move, person closest to the door, moves to the door, pushes the red button, both of those locks, same operation. Goes to the door, pushes the button, secures the door. When I first saw the QAL, this lock here, being deployed, I said, that had an emotional effect on me. I know that is a relatively safe classroom right now because you just protruded a 1-inch stainless steel deadbolt into your jamb, protecting your classroom. We know that the classroom lock set, as it was originally described in code, was a lock set that could not be locked from the inside. Purposely, it was designed that way. So we know that that's not the case anymore, unfortunately. But what's nice about this system, again, it's 100% code compliant. The condition of the room never changes. You can always exit the room. You don't have to, again, have any special knowledge or skill. I mentioned trifecta. That's the locks. I'd love to show them to you more in depth and talk to you about how they work and where we have them, what schools we have them in right now. I'll go to the lockdown shape. We know Sands, Parkland, Florida, after action report, shooter engaged students and staff behind the closed door through view panels. And I hear a lot that I heard even today from police officers. Again, I was a cop for over 30 years. I appreciate that we want to be able to see everything and know everything. But so do the shooters. They want to see and know everything, and they want to be able to target. So as we continue to secure better our classrooms, we need to have a way to secure them from view. Parkland shooter, again, engaging students and staff behind a view panel. The lockdown shade, which is represented in the far right there in the picture, is what we are offering as a solution. It's a simple fabric. It's not ballistic in any manner. It's just screening from view. Again, it's a best practice based on evidence. Yes, sir. There are. They're custom. Well, there are standard sizes to fit either the door, the view panel, and then there are custom cut sizes. And we can talk later. There's, you know, if it's a super large, standard size will fit in these. That's a large area. I mean, that's less typical than what you'll see in the classroom. But yes, to answer your question. So that's the best practice based on evidence to screen from view your classrooms from the exterior hall area. The third thing I'll talk about is Stop the Bleed, a huge initiative. Department of Homeland Security has been pushing this. It's a huge initiative. Our products are a little unique. Everybody puts basically North American rescue equipment, the tourniquets, the hemostatic gauze, Quick Clot is the manufacturer typically of that. The equipment is the same, generally speaking, that's going into these kits that we're buying to stop the bleed. Again, best practice makes 100% sense. What makes this different is it's paired with an app. Now, I'm a digital immigrant, not a digital native. When I heard it was paired with an app, I thought that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Who's going to go to their phone in the event someone's bleeding? I'd love to show you, demo it, and I will over there if you give me the opportunity. It is pretty cool. It's very intuitive. I find that people don't feel like they're alone anymore. They have someone there to assist them. And it resolves your training issue. Yeah, it's built by combat medics, mobilized rescue in Rochester, New York, combat medics, ER doctors, very intuitive. The algorithm's built in such a manner to take you to the bleeding problem first. We know, if your first responders are here, we know that years ago we were told to first check for breathing. We don't check for breathing right away anymore. We're checking for bleeding. We know that within 3 to 5 minutes, you can bleed out from an arterial bleed. And we know that the Stop the Bleed kits are now important. But Tom, 10, 20 years ago, we weren't even allowed to carry tourniquets in the state police. Now they're issued to every trooper, every officer, and now we know that we see our soldiers coming back from combat as amputees. Very regrettable. We know that they probably would have been fatalities if it weren't for tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, and advanced first aid that unfortunately we now see going into our schools. I'm going to tell you real quick, the best way to get this started in your district, your school, or your university, I'm working with a college, Muhlenberg College right now up in Allentown, just throughout the campus they installed the public access stations, which is basically 4 of these kits that I'll show you over there later if you give me the opportunity, co-located wherever the AEDs are. So you now have created a mini medical station. So wherever you have your AEDs, you co-locate a Stop the Bleed public access station. Theirs is actually upgraded to an alarm box, so when the box is opened, they get a silent signal in central station telling them that box has been opened. So now we know that somebody needs to know why that happened. There are alarmed, audible. I don't recommend that. I'm more like a tactical mindset kind of guy. You know, if an alarm's going off and it's local, that's telling the shooter potentially who may still be in the vicinity that that's been accessed. So again, a lot of options available. I'll be happy to guide you through what I think makes sense to me. But again, trifecta, right? The hat trick. Proper code compliant door locking solution, having a Stop the Bleed kit available. Best practice is to have one per every classroom, school bus, and SRO. But I'm going to tell you, start out with at least putting your public access station bleeding control kits, multi-use kits, in co-locating with your AEDs. Because they should have been reasonably thought out for their location. If not, it's time to really rethink that. But that's where you ought to go. And again, lockdown shades. I know I've heard some pushback on it. It's only the cops, for the most part, are pushing back on it. I can talk from experience. I move through hallways. I know I want to see everything, but so does the bad guy. So that's a best practice based on evidence now. I mean, it has been before, but as you can see, I'm passionate about this. This is a space I worked for many years as a state police, as a trooper, as a deputy chief. I worked training the troopers and the officers on how to better respond to and mitigate and you know, move to contact. The rescue task force concept, bringing up you know, medical elements to protect or stop the dying. We stop the killing, stop the dying. But I see that the problem still exists in some of our targeted communities. Commerce is number 1, schools number 2. But we still have a lot of work to do, I think, to be better positioned to protect for this very unfortunate, you know, new normal, if you will. So there's a lot to be done. I'm available for any conversation. I'll be right over there. I look forward to talking to you more. Any questions for me? I don't have any gifts to give out, but either way, they get right or wrong, so there's no risk.
Thank you, Joe. And now we are going to transition to Gant with Visit You. And I am having a little trouble with the technology. Bueller. Bueller.
Escape
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep,
I should
there
have
we
just
go.
let you
Sure,
do
no,
this.
no worries whatsoever. Well, thank you, everyone, for your attendance today. As some of the other vendors had touched on, and this might have been mandatory, but it's great to be in front of a room of people who take the campus security goals and programs seriously. So it's, again, very excited to have the opportunity to present to you. Now, if I can just find where there we go. Perfect. So, Visit You, we are a visitor management system from an iPad, simply put. I don't know how we're getting on the screen for transitioning out of PowerPoint.
Why did it go off? This is you, right?
That's correct. While that's going on, I can I'll just give a quick overview because it's going to be just a glance at our website. We're a visitor management system from an iPad. A quick show of hands, does every school or anyone here have a visitor management program or process in place, i.e. a check-in system for your campus visitors? Does anybody have any of those? Excellent, okay. So, I think it truly is, as we're learning here today through Krista talking, that a campus safety program is an all-encompassing suite of services and features for you. So with Visit You, our goal is to take your visitor sign-in process and simplify that through the use of an iPad. Some of the other options that are on the market, you have a larger hardware footprint, some expensive or individual pieces of equipment that you need to buy and simply replace. What we've taken is the power of the iPad and simply being able to download the app, have that mobility factor and unlimited setups for you for your multiple points of entry, and give you a better ease of use to control your visitors as they come in and out of your campus. Traditionally, the visitor walks up to the app. We'd love to come over and show you a quick demonstration on our iPad. The visitor comes in. Customization is also key. Maybe we want to scan their license to populate up their date of birth and first and last name for a background check against the National Sex Offender Registry. If you're not familiar with Megan's Law, that states that information is public record. So you have that ability to sort of screen and safeguard your campuses as well. We can take photographs of the visitor from the iPad, print those onto badges, have that notification sent to any staff or any locations on your campus that visitor is there to see someone. And most importantly, you'll be able to run reports on that. So you'll be able to see your inflow and influx of visitors, watch list for either informational, VIP member of the community, some sort of someone we just want to make sure everyone's on their on their toes, so to speak, if they come into the office or to the campus, but also to safeguard it. Maybe a watch list situation to where you want to deny someone access if it's been any alerts or news in the community, or even the aspects we see of some of our situations with parents in custody-based issues. So basically, with the visitor management system, it does require a cultural shift of making sure that you're doing everything you're possible to safeguard the ins and outs of the students, or excuse me, the visitors on your campus. But where we've taken it recently, and unfortunately, I wish I had more to show you here on the dashboard from our website, but again, would love to have the conversation with you, is incorporating a couple of other different pieces with regards to our student management and emergency management systems, I think, which ties in to the larger conversation that we're all having here today. When the dust settles in the event of emergency, and we need to start looking at a roll call. Yes, we want to be responsible and aware of our visitors on campus, but we also need to know where our students are at campus, or who is the situations of being able to reach out and have those touch point notifications to our families. We do follow and incorporating a standard response protocol initiative. If you're familiar with the I Love You Guys team, it's a great organization for a family out. in the Denver area who unfortunately suffered unfortunate incidents in their community. But it empowered them to create this program to where they would be able to send quick and customized notifications to their schools with regards to their response protocols in the event of a crisis event. So we have those features that are incorporated in. We've offering Android and iPhone applications in which you can assign to your visitors for easier access and notification into the school system. Once they've been verified, it can make the influx and inflow of your visitor process much more efficiency. So mobility, customization to a visitor management system are some of the keys to success, and not investing in something that ultimately just becomes a larger paperweight or that big giant kiosk that sits over in the corner of a building, and doesn't make that impact into your entire campus safety programs. So I know it's been a bit of an hour. Everyone's been sitting, listening, and you're patient, so I'll make sure to cut things short for you here, but would love to, any questions anyone may have regarding some of our features? Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So with regards to AI for facial recognition, what we're able to do when a visitor comes in, as I mentioned, we can take that real-time photograph of the visitor for their purpose of printing on the badge so that they are recognizable. There's some visitor management systems that like to pull maybe a face ID from the driver's license. What we're able to do is to take that real-time photograph and have that stored in our cloud-based solution. So upon the return visit, we can expedite that return sign-in process and keep the flow of your campus by simply enabling our facial recognition identification software to the visitor to simply walk up to the iPad, have their face scanned, go from the purchase of, or go against the database of their already existing visit, and it expedites that sign-in process exponentially. So you're looking at a sign-in process time of 2 to 3 seconds for you've been able to notify who is on campus and confirm their attendance. We also have a student piece that we're growing with regards to being able to, obviously facial recognition identification can be a little bit tricky in these earlier stages with some of our youth with their changing faces and their growth things, but the idea based around of being able to attendance tracking is what we have kind of on a roadmap with regards to the facial recognition identification of offering a quick and efficient tool, again, to check your visitors in and out of campus. Yes. Mm-hmm. So we do not, thank you, it's a great question and a great feature. The geo-tracking function capabilities are currently on our roadmap for that. What we do have with our phone app is the ability, again, with a parent or student, whoever may have that, of course, is to attach the ownership to be able to remotely report your absences or tardies or scheduled dismissals and of that nature. But as far as the geo-tracking system of where they're at currently in the event of any sort of incident on campus is on our roadmap. Absolutely. So we have Bluetooth connectivity enablement on our phone app so that when you can simply walk up, if you're in and out near the iPad itself and you are a signed-in visitor, it will automatically log you out. So again, having the system run directly through an iPad, I would make an assumption that we've got a lot of iPads perhaps sitting around on your campuses. You can have your multiple points of entry at no additional cost to your subscription so that you can have a better tracking system. Again, it's one thing to pull people in and get them to sign in. It's a whole nother challenge when we try to get them to sign out and get a real-time update of who's on campus. So you do have that ability to sign people out through, and visitors and children as well, through the Bluetooth enablement of the iPhone. Exactly. So again, that's where our solution is trying to circumvent that issue before it's released. So, anyone else? Any other questions? Again, a little quick history of it. We are founded from a day school, Carrollwood Day School in Tampa, Florida, pardon me. So, as a visitor management system, we are founded by educators and IT directors with a campus safety goals in mind. So we think that part of it gives us a real insight and relationship to schools to understand your needs. And again, that's customizational features and being able to pull whatever type of information from reporting of a cloud-based solution in the event of an emergency, it can be the most effective for you in your campus programs. Absolutely. We'd be more than happy to discuss those opportunities with you. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're honored to be here, and it's a pleasure to. We're more than happy. That's exactly right. That's absolutely understood. Cost is king. We understand that for sure. Any other questions? Again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Gant, and thanks to Marshall and Michael and Joe. We appreciate you taking that time to share some of the solutions with us. We are going to do a break in place. So everyone, I encourage you to stand and stretch and possibly even wander over to get a Nutter Butter, because when was the last time you had a Nutter Butter? And we have coffee over here, but we are going to continue the program. So stand, stretch, and if you're not getting a Nutter Butter, resume your seat, please. And Chris is going to continue with the program. But I don't know what to do here, so I'll let you do that. We'll have to call them back, because now I've accidentally dismissed them.
Yeah. I'm going to do a little.
Pardon?
I'm going to do a little lockdown drill with them.
Oh, perfect.
So that'll get them moving around a little bit, move some blood.
Excellent. I think that's what they need.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you this is my absolute favorite handout. This is a student from Parkland who's working on working on a book, and this is an excerpt from her book, and it defines the days after Parkland, talks a little bit about the days before, the days after the shooting, and it's just, read it when you're in a place where you're willing to cry, but it sort of helps understand what the student's perspective is during the lockdown and afterwards. So we're going to sort of define all the different perspectives in this conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're going to do a little lockdown.
Hi.
In this room, and we'll probably do that here.
Sure. This, he handed out this, and then he was working on, and you might as well take it with you, just the idea of taking from what sent you the PowerPoint, so you'll receive it, to take away some goals. And the PowerPoint is, goals are goals. The PowerPoint is really comprehensive, so you should be able to do that.
Yep, so it was really pretty right in.
Oh, okay. So sorry. Just hoping the homing pin.
It works. It takes a while.
It takes a while, but it kicks in. All right, we are. This is going to be the next session, so we'll be starting in another minute. And Chris and Lauren will be handing those out. Sure. Sorry, Chris.
No worries.
I think we're just going to let you guys take a break because you insisted on taking a break. Are you leaving us? Oh, you did tell me that. This is good, huh? What? I don't. Is that?
Oh, that's me. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Just making sure
Like,
that everyone was
don't
working.
toy with me.
Making sure. I know, she was like, what the heck is going on?
Well, did you hear me? Bueller. I'm totally dating myself. Like, somebody help me out of this situation. All right, yeah, we can't do anything. We're going to give them till 1, and then we're starting.
Fair.
Well, I appreciate you coming for this work.
Love to catch up. And anything you want me to do for school, you want to listen to all the big players.
Absolutely.
So,
I'm going to make a note to connect with you. Yeah.
Or Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
We'll make it Monday because you got to Monday or Tuesday for
Yeah,
chat.
I would love to.
Game plan and be like, okay, what we're trying to accomplish. And I can kind of be like a little.
Well, I'd love to do that. Yeah, let me talk with Aggie about that, but I do think we need to explore their commitment to this relationship.
Well, yeah, because I think right now, this last year or so, it's not really as far. It's kind of limbo.
It's in limbo.
It's in limbo.
It's it's in limbo. And, whether that's the transition of Al to me
No.
Bob,
I think, to be honest with you, I don't think it's anything. I think personally, they got two. They restructured their inner structure, and I'm not really kind of thinking in terms of it. I get why they did it, but I'm still just going. I don't know, but I want to see what we can do to make sure we, if possible, get back on track with this whole thing with us.
Absolutely.
But so I mean, Josh knows I'm pretty straightforward.
Yeah. No, and it's great that you're going to be down.
And I can be the good cop, bad cop kind of guy. Like I can be like, hey, listen, man, people just aren't feeling the love like they used to, and all that. And in the meantime, like, listen, you're new and all, maybe you guys need to work on getting. There's an opportunity, but here's the thing, though. We need a full reset, and we got to get back on track. But I mean, I told Josh, I was just like, it's embarrassing when I go to places. I'm like, yeah, what happened to these guys? We used to have a good crew that used to go to school to you.
To the universities, I remember that. Yeah. All right.
Anyway, we'll be
All right, everyone, I'm going to bring you back. Please, if you could bring your Nutter Butters to your seat. That'd be great. Chris is going to circle everyone around. This next part of the program, preparing for lockdown, all of our schools, as part of accreditation processes, have had to look through these drills, have had to work through crisis management teams, designating people, thinking through these questions. I know part of Chris's program coming up is going to involve some of that conversation and preparedness, so I know it's going to be very helpful to you. Perfect timing, Chris. I think we are ready to go.
All right. All right, so we are going to transition into this conversation about lockdown, and we're going to have, I mentioned earlier, I think oftentimes when we talk about safety, lockdown and active shooter are the things that are on people's minds, and for some of you, actually I should ask you, as you looked at agenda, how many of you were more focused on or eager to hear about the resilience, organizational resilience conversation from this morning? All right, how many of you are more eager to hear the lockdown conversation this afternoon? How many of you have too many Nutter Butters in your hands to raise your hands? I'm interested by that. What I want to do, and I've never actually done this with this type of setting or this type of room, but I want to give it a shot. And I think I'm just going to say it. There's a threat in this building, or there's a threat in the neighborhood, and we get a call from local police, and they say, hey, you need to go into lockdown. Let's go ahead and go into lockdown. There are going to be a couple rules. The big and priority rule is we're going to stay in this space, so you can't go out of this space, or out those two doors, I should say. We're not going to do the Alice. We're not going to fight each other. And if you're armed, please keep it holstered, because this is just a drill. So aside from those rules, though, I'm going to ask you to be as realistic as you can be, to be thoughtful, to be communicative, right? There are all of us in this room, so we should talk about how we're going to handle this together, but I'm also not going to give you any time to plan. So I'm going to say it is, well, I should get my, oh no, I don't have a phone. I'm going to get my phone timer out, and I'm going to hit my stopwatch, and I'm going to say, let's go into lockdown now. All right, I heard that. Excellent. Please don't make that phone call, but good to call it out.
Let's all get out of sight.
Nice. I love the banner movement. I'm not sure about prioritization, but I like the idea. All right, 45 seconds in. How many people feel like we're in lockdown right now? Give me a thumbs up. All right, if I can still see your thumbs, we're probably not in a very good lockdown. Those of you who aren't giving me a thumbs up or who I can still see, let's figure out if we're in the right space. All right, get back there. All right, so everybody that can hear me, it's been 1 minute and 15 seconds. We're still working on it. All right, it's been 1 minute and 32 seconds. I think we're doing pretty well. We've got people on either side. Oh, yeah, somebody. Oh, interesting. So Gant just made it in the door. All right, come on out. Come on back. It's been 1 minute and 50 seconds. So everybody go ahead and grab your seats again. So, does that go better when you do it at school? You know your space, you know the environment you're in. Maybe there's a little more willingness to take charge, right? I was really interested when I looked around this room to see nobody really said, I'm going to take control, right? There was a lot of, I'm going to move around. We're going to work together as a pack. We're going to work together as a group. I did think it was interesting that for the most part, you split down the middle. So half of you were totally safe. You went into the AV room, and you left everybody else out here. And then this half of you, you kind of fit the back of the wall and then made your way over here. So those were some interesting observations of mine. In 1 minute and 50 seconds, we missed some big pieces. Right? We missed turning off the lights. We missed covering most of the windows. We somehow didn't lock that door because Gant was able to get back in. So there were some misses. I wanted to do this with you because I think when you go back to school and when you lead a lockdown training with faculty, with staff, people come into those trainings and they're full of anxiety and they're full of fear and they want to tell you about the worst case scenario they saw. They want to share the worst case scenario they saw in the news. They're terrified about this one thing. They perseverate on really specific issues like my windows don't close or my door doesn't lock or whatever the individual issue is, right? I'm an art teacher. I'm in the kiln room and the kiln goes off and then it's too loud or the air conditioning blows my blinds. You guys, you know what I'm talking about. And I think it can be entirely distracting from the core purpose. And when I talk about lockdown and we talk about the response to an active shooter or somebody who's on campus that doesn't belong there, there are a couple of really critical items I like to push hard. The first is we're going to go into lockdown a couple of times a year. And it's actually a good thing for us to go into lockdown. And I know that sounds a little crazy. And we'll talk about this more and define this a little bit more clearly in a second. But we're going to go into lockdown because we are aware that something's going on in the community, and we want to be extra safe and extra cautious. And we're not afraid of lockdown, but it's actually one of our responses to help pause the community. And I'll show you this data in a second, but I'm going to get ahead of myself because I don't know why, because here I am. We find across the country at almost 1,000 of our schools go into lockdown twice a year. And I know that sounds like a lot, and for some of you, especially if you're in a more rural environment, that sounds like a huge number. For those of you that are in an urban environment, it may not sound like a huge number at all, right? It might be pretty consistent, or maybe a few of you even go into lockdown more frequently because there are people who are near campus or problems that exist near campus. But that's core idea number one. I really want, when you talk to faculty and staff, I want you to say, we're going to go into lockdown a couple times a year. And it's not because there's something terrifying or terrible happening necessarily, but it's because we have this tool in our tool belt, and we're going to use it to make sure that we're safe if we ever have the opportunity to. The second thing I want you to drive home with faculty and staff is I don't care what space you're in, I don't care what room you're in, I don't care where you are, I want to be able to rely on you as leaders. And this is a really hard thing for teachers, right? And how many of you know that when we try to have this conversation with teachers, we say, use your best judgment. They say, but what do I do? And you say, use your best judgment. And then they say, but A or B, right? Because in their minds, they want to know the right answer. They want to perform the right way, and they're really anxious about making those judgment calls. And I'll tell you, when we were first getting started and I was first training teachers, I used to really push hard to try to say to them, use your judgment. We trust you. We hired you because we trust you. We think you're smart. We're not going to be able to form the comfort, right, of making those judgment calls, but we can give them the opportunities for practice. So when you do a lockdown session or you're walking in to do a training, do something like we just did. Say, hey, go into lockdown, and then sort of pick apart where the challenges were, and then they're going to have those tools available to them when they actually go into lockdown in a real event or in their next drill. And then the last thing I want to say, and the last thing I want to drive home, is that I think when we talk about lockdown, there are two parts of lockdown. There's the beginning that's kind of scary. You guys didn't get very scared. But there's the beginning where you're moving quickly and you're moving to try to get the lights off and the door's locked and everybody low to the ground. I heard somebody talk about the walls back there. We'll talk about that in a second. That happens for how long? How long should it take before you get into lockdown? Yeah. 30 seconds at most. How many of you can get into lockdown faster? Yeah? How long? All right. 15 to 20 seconds. Awesome. Anybody faster than that? That's pretty fast, so that makes sense. So for those of you that can get into lockdown even faster, great. But generally speaking, we're looking at somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds. Does it take anybody longer than a minute to get into lockdown? Okay. Oh, this room. Yes. Yeah, 2 minutes in. Thank you. So it can take a little while at times. But ideally, we're not taking longer than 30 seconds. And the reason for that is if this is one of those lockdowns that we're going into because somebody's on campus that doesn't belong here, seconds really do count. And I know it sounds cliche, and I know it sounds all those things, but seconds really will make a difference. That part's scary. But I think the worst part is what happens next, right? Because what do we do after we go into lockdown? We wait. We text our wives, yeah. Based on the looks on some of your faces, you're getting uncomfortable, right? This part's tough. We have to sit and we have to wait. And as a teacher with 15 kids looking at us to direct us, or rather expecting us to direct them, right? 15 kids who are texting their parents, 15 parents, or probably 35 parents, because who knows how many, it's amazing how many more people can text in than text out. But everybody's saying to those kids, this is a terrible situation, right? They're seeing it on the news. Turns out the story they're watching on the news is a totally different city. But they're assuming that that's the problem that's going on at school. Kids are getting anxious, everything's escalating in the classroom. Those minutes of waiting are terrible. And I think for most teachers in particular, and this is true for administrators, this is true for staff, but I really think predominantly for faculty who are consistently stuck there with kids looking at them for leadership, that's the hard part of the lockdown. And so I can't take that away, I can't fix that, but I do want to say that as you do this conversation, as you go in and you do a lockdown training, I want to encourage you to acknowledge it so that at the very least teachers know that they're not alone, that every other teacher in the community is feeling the same way during this event. And I would really push you to try some different mechanisms there. It might be that you stop and you just stare at them for 30 seconds, and it's amazing to watch people's faces. Some of your faces were really incredible. Some of you were taking notes or doing something else, and then a few seconds went by and you were kind of like, and then you looked up and then you were like, what's going on? What did I miss? And so it's just fun to do as a presenter, frankly. But I would encourage you to really reinforce for them that part is scary, right? That part is tough. And there's nothing we can do to make it better except for maybe communicate a little bit, right? We might be able to send out a text message or a phone call or an email that says, here's what's going on, here are some speaking points, here's what to talk to kids about. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. But other than that, they're stuck in those moments, and you just want to help them build the muscle of patience, comfort, and confidence, because those are the things that are going to get them through those moments. So the way we're going to have this conversation today, we're going to talk just briefly about pre-lockdown, because there are some things I want you to go out and to do today, or tomorrow, or Monday. And then we're going to talk about lockdown, because that's a really critical part of the lockdown process, obviously. And then we're going to talk again briefly about post-lockdown, because I think just as we were talking this morning about recovery, my focus is not so much, that's not true. My focus is on the emergency, right? I want to prepare everybody in advance of the emergency. I want to endure the emergency as well as we can. But then our long-term focus, our long-term sustainability, comes from making sure that we recover from the emergency properly. And so I really do want to make sure that you have some strategies there as well. I would also tell you that I shared at the beginning, we've been doing this for 12 years now. And over the years, we've talked to every agency, Department of Homeland Security, the different police departments, the FBI. We are leading this sort of group where everybody's checking best practices against one another's, right, to see, are we really doing the best thing we can for schools? Is there more we could or should be doing? All of those groups, I think I probably learned the most from a single student. Lorena is a student who endured the Parkland shooting just over a year ago. And she came out and she talked to our leadership team and presented on her experience. She talked about what she felt as she was there the day of the shooting. She talked about this moment of when she felt like giving up, sitting in a closet in the middle of a classroom. She talked about the post-lockdown pieces and talked about a little bit of how that all looked and didn't look. But she shared three kind of core areas that I want to share with you and that I really want to ultimately share with everybody, because I think these are maybe the three most important pieces. So the first is, she shared that she didn't trust the security team. And I think that's a really hard and really real statement, really raw statement to make. She actually said she didn't trust faculty or staff either. And the reason for that is that faculty, staff, the security team, the adults that were on campus who theoretically should have been making her safe, were people who didn't take drills seriously. They were people who joked around with the kids a lot and had these sort of, I wouldn't call them inappropriate relationships in like a boundary violation way, but I would call them not appropriate relationships as in leader and followers, right? And so instead of really being the poised authority figures, they were more relatable to students than they probably ought to have been. And again, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, because it wasn't that they were doing something ethically wrong, it was just that they were positioned incorrectly. But she said that as everybody was responding that day, as everybody was going into lockdown that day or trying to respond to the shooting, that there were security guards yelling, go this way, and she said, and I didn't trust them, so I went that way. And I said, what do you mean? You know, a security guard who's there to keep you safe. It's their job to tell you what to do in perhaps no greater an opportunity than this. And she said, well, I didn't trust them because they didn't give me a reason to beforehand. They never took the drills seriously. They would tell us to go this way as a joke in drills. And so the most important takeaway, I think, for each of you is, I get it that fire drills and lockdown drills and all the drills that you experience become routine, but I would really push you to examine how faculty, how staff, how security, how all adult personnel on campus interact with students around these drills. Because it surprised the heck out of me that students not only noticed, but also developed a hesitation or a pause in respecting or listening to what those adults were saying in a real emergency. The second thing Lorena said is reunification was terrible. She said that by the time the reunification process had started, and you heard in one of the vendor conversations, right? Lockdowns don't just take 5 minutes anymore. In fact, arguably lockdowns are a 1 to 4 or 5 or 6 hour process nowadays, because even a lockdown where we can actually release ourselves, we've got to make sure that everything's okay. I had a false alarm lockdown a couple weeks ago, and it was a whole drama that I'm not going to get into right now. But by the time we figured out it was a false alarm, it was probably 25 minutes into the event. And so we had just lost 40 minutes of school day once we did attendance and got everybody back. These are not quick things. In this case, it was a couple hours later before reunification actually started. And there's this challenge with reunification that is, as soon as parents see their students, you lose control. Right? As soon as there's eye contact between a parent and a child, you have absolutely lost control of the situation. And so that happened. So there are kids climbing fences, there are kids running past the security team, the police officers who were there. You know, you see this SWAT team there that's, you know, trying to keep everything under control, and kids running by, not because the SWAT team wasn't doing everything they could, but because the connection between parents and students is stronger than anything else. And so she said, if there was one thing I could ask other schools to do, if there was one thing that would make a difference for other students, it would be to practice reunification. And so for those of you that earlier you were like, nah, maybe I'll practice reunification, hopefully that's a second push that'll help you get over the line and schedule that drill. And then the third thing she talked about was support. And we'll talk more about this in the post-lockdown conversation, because I think that's really where this impact is, for lack of a better way to put it. But there was a need to provide all levels of support, not just counseling, not just group therapy, not just settings for discussions or, you know, art. They were doing some art therapy, some equine therapy, all sorts of other therapies that were offered in the immediate aftermath. But I just presented at NAIS with Lorena, and she's still not getting the support that she needs in that sort of holistic and comprehensive way that she wants and feels like she deserves after going through that experience. And so I want to just spend a few minutes towards the end of the conversation today talking about what you can do that might at least help students understand how much you care and how much support really is there for them. So that's really heavy stuff. Let's take a quick deep breath. And let's talk about more heavy stuff. So I want to shift in, again, kind of on the pre-lockdown side, I want to shift into maybe the most important pre-lockdown lesson that there is, and that's around threat assessment. Out of curiosity, how many of you have a threat assessment process in place already? Okay. I'm going to ask you to pull your goals sheets out again. Hopefully they're not too far. Anybody need one? I'm going to ask you to add to your goals sheets to, if you don't currently have a threat assessment team, to develop a threat assessment team. If you do currently have a threat assessment team, go ahead and pat yourselves on the back because you deserve it. And then jot down practice with my threat assessment team. A threat assessment team is basically a team of people who care. And I think when we use the language threat assessment, it sounds like Department of Homeland Security, it sounds scary. It feels like it's a little counter-independent school, right? Because we care, we're connected, we're engaged. What I would equate it to, more so than like the Department of Homeland Security stuff, is how many of you have a student support team? Right, or how many of you have a group of people that's maybe division leaders and a dean and somebody, maybe a nurse, people at school who come together and they talk about kids who might need a little bit of extra support with academics or anything else? Most of you are saying, yeah, you've got something like that. I would relate the threat assessment team much more to that. And the reason that I do that is because I think as we talk about this, we're going to define it a little bit differently than maybe other threat assessment teams have been defined in the past. So there are a couple of really critical pieces. The first is your threat assessment team should have your incident commander. Your threat assessment team should have your school counselor. Your threat assessment team should have you, or whomever it is that's tasked with safety and security on campus. Your threat assessment team should have some specialist teachers, like an art teacher, a music teacher, a coach who sees all the different kids and has those really wide relationships. Your threat assessment team should probably have your nurse. Did I say nurse already? Some of you, I don't know, it should have your nurse. Because your nurse is going to see potential challenges. And I would tell you that a lot of times when we talk about the threat assessment team, we're not talking here about a student who's threatening to come to school and blow school up, or to bring a gun to school, or to hurt a bunch of people. One of my favorite recent stories is we had a student who started drawing really negative stuff in art. And everything he drew was in black, and it had these weird, creepy wings, and it was just a scary set of images. And this was new, because this student had been in art and drawing and really was an incredibly talented artist. But all of a sudden, everything turned to these really almost demonic images. And so the art teacher said, hey, there's something not quite right here. So the art teacher went to the threat assessment team and said, I just want you to know this piece of data. And then interestingly, the school nurse came to the threat assessment team and said, hey, there's another point of data. This was within about a 24-hour period. This student had been to the school nurse 18 times in 2 weeks and had never once been to the school nurse before that. That's serious, right? There's something up here. Maybe the student broke a leg, but in this case they didn't. This was like Band-Aids, boo-boos, and hugs, really was what the student was coming in for. Next, the English teacher came in and said, we're starting to see stories of suicide. We're starting to see stories of a student who's hurting themselves or a student who's hurting somebody else at school. And the English teacher reported that into the threat assessment team. And at that point, the threat assessment team had that data already assembled and was able to say, okay, there are 3 distinct places where this is coming from, and this is a pattern, there's a concern here. So they assembled the team, they evaluated the situation, and they said our first step is to have the counselor call home. Turns out the student was experiencing a divorce at home. And that's probably the most common reason for lockdown, for threat assessment, for all of the bad stuff that we're going to talk about across the country, is just a divorce. And as simple as it is, it creates this massive turmoil in families, and it often ends up at school, right? We've got one parent trying to pick up a student, another parent saying they shouldn't. The lawyers get involved, everybody's fighting, everybody's upset about it. And at the end of the day, all you really want to do is make sure that student is safe and goes home with the right people. Well, in that situation, because the threat assessment team came together and because they reached out and called home, they were able to then partner the student's home therapist with the school counselor. And for a period of a few weeks, they connected and the student got through the situation. Artwork turned to color again. The parents' divorce concluded, and the students, there were actually 2 students at the school, so both students ended up a little bit healthier after the divorce was done. And it was very clear who was allowed to do what and what days and all that sort of nonsense that's associated with those things, because the process was able to take place from the threat assessment team out. And so my push would be that when you think about a threat assessment team, that you stop thinking about it as a bomb threat or an active shooter threat or a social media threat. All those things are real. All those things happen. We probably had 500 threats over the course of the last year, a lot of which are social media and Snapchat threats, and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. But I would also push you to really be mindful of how many threats are going to come from within and come from just within a student's own self, right? This is a student who's being bullied. This is a student who's failed a test for the first time ever and doesn't know how to process it. And that's really where your threat assessment team can build the muscle for responding and reacting, doing the right pieces, doing the right steps. I didn't mention this, but your threat assessment team should also include your local police department, either your SRO or some form of your local PD. How many of you currently have a relationship with police? Phenomenal. Okay. If you don't, I would add that to your goals sheet. It's something you should do. And the best case scenario is to actually invite your SRO or your assigned police officer, your assigned detectives. Different areas will do it differently. But invite that person to join your practice threat assessments, because there's nothing worse than realizing in the middle of a real threat assessment that the police have a fundamentally different way of assessing a threat than you do, right? Everything that we're talking about today is all about how can we put ourselves in an environment where we're prepared and we know what this is going to look like before we deal with the emergency itself. This is no different. I showed this image earlier, but I would show it again just to say that when we do our threat assessments, our goal is to say what's the likelihood that this thing can happen, right? What's the likelihood that this student who's drawing demonic images and talking about suicide and death, student who's showing up at the nurse's office all the time, what's the likelihood that, A, there's anything even wrong? And we said it very. We said, in fact, definitely. Very rarely in my life can I say definitely or no, not at all. In this case, I was able to say definitely. And then we said, okay, well, what are the potential things that this student could do? What are the things that could happen? And so self-harm was on the list. Harming others was on the list. Nothing was on the list, right? There were a lot of different items that we threw out. We said if the student did do any of those things, what's the impact to the community? How big of a deal is it going to be? Some of them were really catastrophic. Others were minimal to moderate. And so we were able to say, okay, it ended up in the red category. This is a situation we absolutely have to respond to. Just like fire, just like lockdown, this is a situation we just don't have a choice. We've got to do something about. Any threat assessment questions? It's a quick threat assessment conversation, and I know a lot of you have some work to do there. Okay. Then I'll shift into this pre-lockdown conversation. And it's interesting that you just heard a little bit about some of the lockdown devices that can be used. And we'll start by talking about door latches and some good ones and some bad ones and some challenges that you'll find that are extra exciting. We'll talk about where you want to be, and then I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about run, hide, fight versus Alice versus lockdown, right? How many of you are currently using just regular lockdown? Couple? How many of you are using Alice? Okay. How many of you are using Run, Hide, Fight? Anybody using anything different? No? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about those. So before the lockdown ever actually, all right, we'll go back to that one. Before the lockdown ever actually starts, there's some work that you need to do. The first thing I want to challenge you to do, and so you can, at this point, flip over your goals sheets. You're probably to the back. But the first thing I want to challenge you to do is to go out and do a door audit. Inevitably, because of the way the Department of Education code is written, most school doors are built without a lock on the inside. Most school doors are locked without a push-button lock or the ability to lock the door from the inside. And the idea with that makes total sense 40 years ago. Right? We wanted to prevent misconduct. We wanted to prevent the idea of teachers and students being alone in a classroom to increase visibility. It's great for Montessori learning and observation. I mean, there's so many different reasons that we want to make sure that we always have free flow in and out of a classroom. At the same time now, we've got to sort of reflect and say, is that really the best thing we can do? Is that really the smartest thing to do? And the answer is not really. We've got to find some mechanism to lock the doors from the inside. And so there are options like you can put on the actual devices on the doors, and I'll go over to these. And you can say, okay, we're going to just install new doorknobs, or we're going to install an add-on to the doorknobs that already exist. You heard earlier, there are a couple of different devices out there. There's this, see if I have a pointer, I do. There's this little guy here. It's about a $12 latch. So certainly it's much less expensive. At the same time, to be frank, these things fall off every 6 months or so, if not more frequently, especially if the doors are used a lot. The idea with this is that it actually keeps the door just ajar. So the door locking mechanism, right, this little latch here that every door has on it, never actually gets an opportunity to engage. So the door is still locked all throughout the day, and if at any point we need to go into lockdown, we just flip that switch, and it allows the door to actually engage. Again, $10, $12 causes some other challenges and does have to be replaced a lot. There's this guy, this night guard. Does anybody here have the night guard installed or the night lock installed? Has anybody heard of it? Okay, a few of you. There are some interesting challenges with this one. The fire department, and I support them 100%, says at any given point, if I'm inside a building, I have to be able to escape or egress from the building with just a single push or a single touch. So these doors in the back, we have to be able to push them and they have to open. If I were to open a classroom door that has a traditional doorknob, I have to be able to turn the doorknob and then it has to open. There can never be a time where I have to turn a deadbolt and then turn the door. Now you can do that at home, right? A lot of you have a deadbolt on your door plus a doorknob. But how many of you have ever been in a hotel where you actually turn the doorknob and all of a sudden your deadbolt releases? It's the law for any commercial space. Law, fire code, same thing. These night guards, unfortunately, prevent that, right? Because as soon as I install this little red L-shaped anchor, for lack of a better word, then all of a sudden I can't egress from the door or from that space without actually doing that and then turning the doorknob. They're about $60 to buy. They're probably another $30 to $40 to install. Relatively long term, the fire department will eventually tell you that you have to take them out until the fire department and the police department get on the same page and come up with some kind of long-term solution. There are these super cheap and easy magnets. I use these for instant solutions. These are $6 to $10. They work the same way as the school safe latch up at the top. They just prevent the door locking mechanism from engaging. And so if you're knowing that you need to come to a different solution, but it's April, you're not going to do something this year, this is a summer project, those are great because you can just throw them in, take them out. Long term, not great because from a fire perspective, they do allow the fire to push out into the hallway, and so that's bad in our line of work. But they're a good short-term solution. And then the lock block works basically the same way. So all to say, I would push you to do a door audit and just understand how your doors are currently functioning, how teachers might currently go into lockdown. Because the one thing you can't do is say to teachers, hey, you know what I want you to do when we go into lockdown? Find your keys. How long does that take? 2 hours? Oh, too long? Both might be true. Yeah, it takes at least 20 seconds, right? Unless your teachers are wearing them around their necks or they're wearing a bracelet with them, both of which, by the way, I fully support. Or maybe they're wearing a little lanyard thing with their keys or their ID or their access control card. Unless they're really accessible, it's probably going to take them a few seconds to go fish them out of the desk, out of a purse, out of a jacket pocket. They just have to go find them. And then you say to them, I want you to go out into the hallway. And this is when they go, wait, what? And you say, and then I want you to lock the door and then go back inside. That's not a conversation I want to have with teachers, right? It's uncomfortable. Can you do it for a short period of time? Sure, but you have to also articulate a plan to close that gap, because teachers are going to identify it as a gap, and then they're going to start to lose confidence. I would argue across the board with lockdown and all things safety related, that safety really starts with confidence. I argue if people don't feel confident, if they don't trust you, if they don't trust the community to do everything that the community possibly can to keep them safe, that they're going to start to get afraid. And the more afraid they are, the more they get into their own heads, the more they second guess themselves, the less they do. The less they do, the more vulnerable they end up being. And so even though it's a really small detail, and even though in the scheme of things, if you're really locking down quickly, like in a second or two, it may not make as big of a difference, it's a really easy way for you to build confidence, and again, that's going to build safety. A lot of you have out-of-sight spaces. How many of you have those marked in the classrooms, or have heard that you should mark those in the classrooms? Okay. After Parkland, there was a big push, and in fact, because of that, right? We've got these visibility windows. A lot of our doors have some form of window. Montessori schools, you have an observation window that's huge, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful because you can see education happen within the space, but then you have to go into lockdown, it creates this other issue. There was this big conversation about marking spaces within classrooms, and then there were these shelters that they were starting to sell, and I suspect some of you will get approached by them at some point. What I would say is, if we're trying to build confidence, and we're trying to build connection, and we're trying to build on what we already have inherently as independent schools, which is community, then let's not take the huge step of painting sides of rooms red. Let's not take the huge step of installing million-dollar bomb shelters and gun shelters and active shooter shelters in our classrooms. Let's really work on the threat assessment. Let's work on prevention. And then let's work on finding these practical applications, these practical tools that we can give to teachers, add to their tool belts, and help them be a little bit more safe. Similarly with drills, how many of you, well, let's just kind of throw this out there. So how many of you currently do some form of lockdown drill a couple times a year with students? Okay. For those of you that don't, can I ask you to share why not? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you didn't hear, her kids are 3 years old. So trying to explain to a 3-year-old why we're going into lockdown feels tough. I will talk a little bit about a strategy for that, but 3-year-olds, that's tough. What else? I saw a lot of hands not go up. Anybody else comfortable sharing? Yeah. Okay. I like that. We're still working on our adults. For the record, I'm not handing out cigarettes. These are playing cards. So if that changes your opinion about whether you're willing to share or not, I don't know. But so I think those are really common concerns that come up. People say, well, if I start to practice with students, they're going to ask questions, right? And if they ask questions, then they're going to become afraid. And if they're afraid, then they're not going to come to school. Again, I would say our goal in this with students, with teachers, with parents, with faculty, with everybody, I said faculty twice, with everybody is to make sure that we're building confidence in this process. So a strategy that we've used for really young kids is we've talked about this swarm of bees. And this is it's a story that I love. But years ago, we had done a lockdown training for everybody at a school. And we said to them, if you ever need to get everybody inside, if they need to move quickly, you need to get the lights off, you need to lock all the doors, and really get into this pause position, you yell lockdown. And we'd empowered everybody in the community to yell it at the top of their lungs. And so we practiced it over and over again. And they had a swarm of bees the next day that buzzed up onto the playground. And not because it was the right thing to do, per se, but because it was the best way that this teacher could think of to get everybody into safety. She yelled lockdown as loud as she possibly could. Everybody went into lockdown. Everybody was fine. There were no bee stings that day. I'm very happy to report. But we began to use that as the story for lockdown for younger kids, because it's a way for them to understand that they need to move quickly, they need to hide, quote unquote, from the swarm of bees, that they need to follow directions, and there's some concern or some danger that's at stake. But it's a way that doesn't force me to say to them, there's somebody here that wants to hurt you, right? Because the worst thing I can possibly say to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or an adult is there's somebody here that wants to hurt you. And so I actually use that swarm of bees scenario when I talk to adults too. And the reason for that is because as soon as I say the words active shooter, people's shoulders go up, their fear goes up, their belief that this will never happen here goes up, and their retention and their listening goes down. And so, again, we're talking about the same skills, and some of you may say, well, if we're dealing with a swarm of bees, you might actually want to do a shelter in place. You know that, right? But faculty don't necessarily know that, so that's okay. But you get retention, you get people to really engage with you, you get people to stick with you, and you get them to be confident, and that's really what this is about. As far as the younger students and trying to get teachers there first, I think what I would challenge everybody in the room to do is to say, by the time we get to winter break next year, we're going to do a lockdown drill with students. And in fact, I'll ask you to go ahead and grab your goals sheets if you haven't done these yet. And let's do these small, right? We don't have to do a big active shooter drill. We don't have to do what they did in, was it Indiana? Where there were people who actually shot teachers with pellet guns or BB guns or something, or paintball guns. We don't have to do any of that. In fact, we should never do any of that. But we can do a lockdown drill where we say in a very controlled voice over the PA system or over a series of radios or maybe through our emergency notification system, we say, hey, everybody, we're going to go into lockdown. Go into lockdown, sit there for a few minutes, let everybody sort of adjust to that moment of silence. Then we say, hey, everybody, we're going to release. And just going through that process a couple times gives people the confidence that they can actually do it. So I would really push you to try to do that by winter break of next year. The other thing I would tell you is that every year now in February, and probably to an extent every year in April, every year in December, there's a little bit of added anxiety around school safety. Sandy Hook happened in December, Parkland happened in February, Columbine years ago happened in April. And so those are the times where parents start to ask questions. They start to say, hey, are we prepared? Are we safe? Because those items are in the news. And so if you're trying a drill, if you're doing a drill, it's great to do it somewhere ideally right ahead of those moments so that you can say, hey, not only are we prepared, but we actually just did one of those drills last week. And that gives you a little bit of extra confidence, gives the parents a little bit of extra trust in you. And then we talked about this earlier, but the most important thing that you can do from a lockdown perspective is tell everybody. Right? I mean, if there's nothing else that you do, if you don't turn off any of the lights, if you don't close any of the doors, if you don't lock anything on campus, if you don't keep anybody safe, the most important thing you can do is tell people that this event is going on. And so I would push each of you to have either within your emergency notification system or within your PA system or within your campus marquee sign or TV system, in some way, shape, or form, have the ability to get a template out that says lockdown. And I would say you should aim to be able to get that template out within about 5 seconds. How many of you have your emergency notification system on your phone? All right, if I said to you right now, go ahead and put your school into lockdown from your phone, how long would it take? A couple seconds? Push of the button? Back here? In a couple minutes? Oh, don't have it on your phone. Okay. Back here? I saw a couple other hands.
Not one of these dogs, but
oh. Okay. So let's go ahead and add that to our goals sheets as just a checkpoint, something to go back and to take a look at. I would say our goal is to make sure that at least 7 people, you can pick who the 7 people are. It could be everybody, but at least 7 people have the ability to get a message out from their phones within a matter of 5 seconds or less. So if that's through an app or through a panic button, through a key fob or like those car clicker fob type devices, doesn't really matter to me how they do it. But I would say at least 7 people should be able to get that message out within 5 seconds. And then again, that message that goes out to parents can be a very simple and straightforward holding message that says, hey parents, we're in lockdown. Don't come to school because we don't have time for you. We'll update you again in 30 minutes and we'll give you more information at that point. And if you're really concerned that you won't be able to get a message out within 30 minutes, then you could always say 45 minutes. But you want to give people a clear expectation around when you're going to communicate next, because without it, they're going to start to call you.
When you're saying a holding message, how are you expressing it? Are you saying via email, in an app, or like what's the best mode to do that?
Yeah, really good question. So my favorite mode is phone call, text message, and email. Yeah, because we deal with emergencies, I always say let's communicate in as many different mechanisms as we can. And if we reach one parent 3 times, they're typically grateful. And realistically, we're going to miss some parents. We're going to reach them no times, and they will be angry. But at the very least, we can say we did send an email, we did send a text message, we did send a phone call. For those of you using a fairly robust notification system, you should be able to call home, cell, and work for both parents, or all 4 parents, or all 7 parents, whatever the situation might be. And so I would push you to do that during these emergencies. And I would also push you to test those systems during drills, because that's the best way to find out whose data you do have and whose data you don't have. So, oh, yeah.
Oh, the kids are going to be traumatized, we can't do that. But for lockdown drills, it's sort of become routine for us as well, several times a year. We no longer notify parents during lockdown drills for that reason. We don't want them to we don't want to remind them. What we do is a couple of times a year, we send a notice in our weekly newsletter that we do have these drills. We had one last month, we'll probably have one in another month. And we let them know we're having them, but we don't notify them during the event. We internally test our communications other ways. So, I do have everyone, we do make sure that we can text and phone sort of regularly. If the parents don't do that, that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I think that brings up a really important point, especially for those of you who haven't yet really gotten into doing drills with students. The question always comes up. Do I communicate to parents beforehand? Do I tell parents that we're going to do this and tell them how to talk to their kids, which is often a whole challenge and a whole just ball of wax that we don't want to get into? Or do I wait? Do I communicate after? Or do I do like we do here and say we're not going to tell them at all? And what I would challenge you to do, or what I would offer that we've done, is I would say the first year or so that you tune into safety, right? You know, for the most part, where your school is. If you're already tuned in, great. If you feel like this is your year to tune in, or next year is your year to tune in, that's okay too. But the first year that you tune in, I would say communicate to parents. And I always actually say the drill is going to be on Tuesday. It's going to be at 10 a.m. This is how it's going to work. These are the changes we're going to make. And I tell teachers that, I tell parents that, I even tell kids that. And then as we work through the year, maybe the second half of the year, as kids get a little bit older, especially if they're younger, like K through 3-ish, then I say, okay, we're going to do a drill on Tuesday. And I tell parents that, I tell teachers that, I tell students that, but I don't tell them what time. And then as we get more comfortable, confidence goes up, then I tell them, okay, we're going to do a drill next week. And then we're going to do a drill next month. And then we stop telling people about it, stop communicating about it, because it does just become part of our routine. And I love that you compare it to a fire drill, because nobody cares about fire drills. In fact, I can't even get, yeah. Sure. I can't even get people to evacuate the building sometimes during a fire drill, right? They're so non-impactful. And so that's what we're trying to achieve with lockdown, is that same degree of confidence and that same degree of lack of anxiety. We talk about some data points for everybody, and a data point that I really want to call everybody's attention to is actually this one. And you can't see this chart because we didn't think to put it on a different color background. But you can tell that there's one really big outlier on the left. And I'll just tell you a little bit of the story of this chart before we even talk about what that is. This is every active shooter event that's taken place at a school since 1970. And the bottom row there talks about the purpose or the cause of each of these events. And so you can see on here, bullying is listed, mental health is listed, hostage is listed, gang is listed, accidental is listed at a actually surprising number. And there's one over there on the left that makes me go, huh, we have to do something about that, because that is a significant and meaningful outlier. And that's an escalation of dispute. So we talked earlier about threat assessment. We talked about the importance of having that team of not DHS-izing it, but instead making it more like that student support team. How can I provide support and care and compassion? How can we be the community organization that we already are? I would argue that that threat assessment team can prevent these. And I don't want to Monday morning quarterback or suggest that that these events were preventable per se, but I do want to challenge us in this room to use this data to fuel our energy to prevent these. Because these are disputes where two kids got into it online at a party, or online over the weekend, got into it at a party overnight, got into it at the lunch table, got into a fight. These are disputes like two parents that get into some sort of altercation on the bus. By the way, everything seems to happen on the bus. I heard an issue that came up on the bus from somebody during the vendors' conversations, and I was like, oh yeah, I think we dealt with one of those yesterday. So these disputes that take place wherever they are, they find their way to school because that's the one thing that most communities have in common. That's the one location that everybody comes back to. And those are the opportunities, or those are the items that I think that we can prevent. So is anybody surprised by that data? No? I was, when I first saw this. I was sort of taken aback by how preventable some of these incidents could be. But I think one of the challenges that you have, and I wish I could help you with this one, is when you go back to your community and you talk to your leadership team, you talk to your faculty, you talk to your staff, there's this conversation that takes place and people say, oh, that will never happen here, right? And I'm not the scared straight type, so I don't go down the road of, oh, it could happen anywhere. What I say is whether it's this, or whether it's a custody battle, or whether it's a jaguar that finds their way to campus, or an alligator that shows up on a playground yard, by the way, true stories, something can happen, right? And I want to make sure that whatever that is, no matter how small or large, that we either handle it correctly or we use it to build our muscles so that we can handle the next one correctly. And I would push you to take that stance because I think it's a little easier for people to hear. And I can't help you solve that, but maybe that language will be helpful for you. I do want to just talk for a second about the run, hide, fight conversation. I heard a couple of you say that you use run, hide, fight. A couple of you say that you use Alice. A couple of you say that you use lockdown. I'm going to ask for 3 people. So one person on lockdown to just tell us in 3 sentences, what is lockdown to you? Yeah.
Go close the door, obviously close the windows, and go from top of the table to the face into the classroom where you are. These kind of stuff.
Excellent. All right, close the doors, close the windows, get inside. Yeah. All right, what's run, hide, fight? Yeah. Awesome. You should, I'll follow up with you. Thank you. Somebody who uses Alice, what's Alice?
Basically the same as run, hide, fight, but it's more comprehensive.
Okay, can we put together the acronym real quick? I've got alert.
Lockdown, perform, counter,
Excellent. All right, so quick round of applause for those 3, or 2, yeah, 3. How many of you hear run, hide, fight, you hear lockdown, you hear Alice, and then you go, what should I do? Anybody? Everybody feel pretty comfortable? Okay. I won't take a ton of time here, but I want to call out the fact that it can be scary to see a difference from what you're doing. Right? If I'm doing lockdown and on the news I hear that run, hide, fight is the latest, greatest technology or the latest, greatest strategy, it can be really scary to hear that. Or if I'm doing lockdown and I hear Alice is the new thing, or Alice reps call me and they tell me this is great, it can be scary to hear that. I'll tell you that I can't tell you there's a best case scenario for all of you. Every school community is different, and each of those 3 strategies, as well as a couple others, generally speaking, will work for some communities, and some of them won't work for others. Run, hide, go ahead.
We're in the city.
Mm-hmm.
We have sort of single building, so much of our
I love that. So I'm gonna work my way to the answer of that question. I'm gonna go kind of the long way, the non-lockdown way, which we want to be fast and quick. But what I want to say is that lockdown is a strategy that I would encourage people to start with. And for those of you that are doing something that I'm going to call more advanced for this conversation, right, Alice or Run, Hide, Fight, I don't want to suggest that you should stop doing that either, right? Again, my focus is how can we match the solution to the community, the facilities, the people, how can we make sure we're doing the right thing? But if you're just getting into this, or if you're going to explore for the first time doing these drills with students, I would encourage you to start with lockdown because it's the most prescribed and it's the one that has the least opportunity for judgment calls. And frankly, from lockdown, I can tell people to do whatever I want, right? If I get everybody into lockdown, there's no question about what that means, right? Everybody pretty much understands what to do, how to do it, how quickly people need to do it. And then once they're in lockdown, then I can send a message to them that says, hey, there's a person in this location, and so here's a change in plans. Here's how I want you to respond to it. And I talk about that a lot because I think it's important that we remember that there's no such thing as a final answer with any of these things, right? Once I take care of the initial emergency, then I start to worry about changing the behavior or changing the patterns that I want to see. Some of you that have done lockdown and practiced lockdown a lot might say, okay, well, we need to do something more. I think, frankly, Alice, the program was born out of that anxiety that we talked about earlier, right? We say to teachers, you have to wait, you have to sit, you have to be still, you have to be quiet, you have to be a leader. I think they're scared. And I think the opportunity to do something, to be active and to just start taking action, like Run, Hide, Fight, any of those options-based solutions, I think is really a wonderful tool for teachers simply because it allows them to do something. I would argue you might be able to do the same thing with a deck of playing cards, right? The goal is how can I educate or engage or preoccupy students and teachers while they're in that moment. So now to go back to that question, how do we get flexible? If we go into lockdown first, then I would say to everybody, okay, we're in lockdown. We know more information now. So from the command center, here's the information we have. And this is what we'd like you to do. It's a slight change, but this is what we'd like you to do. And I would encourage you to send it through 3 different mechanisms. Because inevitably, and this is the story I tell when I talk to faculty groups, inevitably the question comes up, right? If I hear a message over the PA system, how do I know that that's not the bad guy or girl? And how do I know that that's not the bad person holding a weapon to my head of school's head saying, do this, right? How do I know my head's not being coerced? And so I say, go ahead and say it over the PA system, but back it up by sending it out through a couple other mechanisms. And I always say, well, could the swarm of bees buzz their way into your head of school's office and say, you better go out and make this message? Sure. But could they also buzz their way into the director of technology's office and send out the text message, phone call, and email that goes out? The answer is maybe, but if those 2 things happen all at the same time, that's pretty unlikely. And that would be a pretty sophisticated set of bees to be able to do that anyway, or a bad person. And so we want to try to get that message out through multiple channels so that it can be trusted and it can be carried out. And does that take some time? Absolutely. But can we do it if we practice quickly, if we practice enough? Can we get it down to be a 5 to 10 second process? We should be able to. It's a really good question. The last piece I want to talk about here is based on where you are from a cultural perspective. When you have this conversation around lockdown, you have this conversation around options-based defenses, or you have any of this discussion, some teachers are going to raise their hands and they're going to say, we need more. We need more security. We need to do lockdowns more. We need to have armed security. We need to have bomb shelters. We need to have, you know this. Anything else that teachers might say? I don't want to scare the kids. What was it? They want to carry a weapon themselves. Anything else? All right, I'll leave it at that. Then there's a whole other school of thought, right? There's teachers that'll say, we're doing too much. We shouldn't be doing these lockdown drills. This is scary for the kids. This is scary for me. This isn't an environment that I want to live in. I didn't become a teacher to do lockdown drills. Didn't go into education to be scared, right? And there's that side. I don't want armed guards. I don't even want security guards. Why do we have to have them? What I would encourage you to do as you manage that is to say, this is where we are today. Today, we have X, Y, and Z in place. And I don't think you can be coy about it, right? I think you just have to say, this is what we've got. And over the course of the next 3 years, we're going to look at ourselves, we're going to look at our processes, we're going to see what's working, and then we're going to implement change. Because we all have to evolve. And 15 years ago, we had a different safety and security plan than we did 15 years before then. And so this isn't net new, this is us evolving with time. This is us making sure that we're being responsive to what's going on around us. But it's also not us knee-jerking into any one specific reaction. I think the worst thing we can do is to immediately arm security after an active shooter event happens somewhere else in the country, or to immediately add security after something weird happens at a neighboring school. Right? In response to a threat assessment, that's a different story. That's thoughtful, it's calibrated, it's the right move. But in response to anxiety or parent concern or parent demand, I think we've got to be more thoughtful than that. And it doesn't have to take a long time, but it does have to take some time. You've got to do that assessment. You've got to do your audit. You've got to make sure that you've got the right pieces in place for the right reasons and at the right times. Because all the decisions we make when it comes to safety and security have consequences. And I want to make sure that our consequences really are worth it and that the benefits far outweigh them. And so I know that's a ton that we've talked about today, and I think if there are a couple of things that I would sort of boil it all back to, and I'll ask you to pull your goals sheets out again. I want to ask you to asterisk your reunification drill. Can you tell I really want you to do that? I want to ask you to underline your lockdown drill, if you haven't already. And by the way, if you're already doing lockdown drills with kids, more power to you. That's awesome. Keep doing them. You can add that to your goals sheet still. I want you to circle your emergency notification system or your holding templates, your holding messages. Those are some of the most important things because those directly impact the community and their ability to engage in any emergency. And then because I'm not sure what you're going to do with this goals sheet, I want to ask you to pull out your cell phone. And some of you are like, what? And I want you to go to your calendar. And if you keep a paper calendar, that's okay. You can pull out your paper calendar too. I'm going to ask you to put 2 calendar events into your calendar. The first one is going to be next Tuesday. Because here's what's going to happen, right? You're going to go back to school or you're going to go home. And then you're going to go back tomorrow and you're going to get distracted. There are going to be all these things that you didn't do today because you were here. Thank you. But those things are going to take priority. And then you're going to go into the weekend and you're going to have wonderful things to do. Hopefully you do. And then you're going to come back on Monday. You will have forgotten the conversation that we had. And so Tuesday, I want to remind you to start to take action on your goals sheet items. So you can just write that in. Take action on my goals sheet items from last Thursday. And you can put it in at a time that's convenient for you. And then I want to ask you to go ahead to the middle of June. Because this isn't a one-stop thing, right? I wish that I could give you the magic wand so that you could just say, okay, I'm done, it's over. Yeah, the only way to do it, mid-June school's closed? Yeah, well, I thought of that. So I want you to go to mid-June or right towards the end of the school year for you. And I want you to put in another calendar invite because you've got some summer work to do. Right? I can't give you the magic wand. I can't help you get this done tomorrow. But I want to remind you to come back to the goals sheet. And if nothing else, think about your calendar dates for next year. Because I find in schools that tends to set everything else. Right? If you schedule the reunification drill next spring, you'll figure out how to do the PD that you have to do beforehand so that people are ready for it. You'll figure out how to do the communication. But you just have to get that time in. So schedule that additional time in June or end of the school year. And then stop texting your kids for a second. Put down your phones. And know that this is a challenge for any school to tackle independently, right? There's no question about it. But I think it's obvious that there are people in this room that you can turn to for support. And so I would challenge you to also walk away today after having exchanged a business card or exchanged a phone number with somebody in the room who maybe you don't know already. Because I think, again, as we go back to that conversation this morning of organizational resilience, there's nothing more powerful than another school who's in your neighborhood. So thank you for your engagement today. And if you have questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes so that we can answer them together. So thank you.
That was great. I don't know if all of you heard Siri reminding one of our members to do that. That was perfectly timed. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a fabulous presentation. I also want to thank our vendors who came hither and yon today to talk to our membership. So Joe from Guardian, Marshall and Brian from Ruvna, Gant from Visit You, and Michael from Athena. So we really appreciate you gentlemen sharing your information and your safety solutions with our membership, and we thank you for the support of this event as well. Let's give them a little round of applause for their good work. We'll be sending out an evaluation. We always love to hear back from you, and also we're always eager here at PAISBOA to hear from you, our members, other programs that will be helpful to you. So that's how this program came from. It was the steering committee, our plant manager's steering committee that came up with this. So please do always be thinking of ways that we can support you in the work you do. So thank you so much. I know our vendors and Chris and Lauren are going to stay around for a few minutes, so please don't hesitate to circulate the room and talk with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
It was awesome. I know I was